I've always wondered, what if I should share my story too? Generally, I'm a very skeptical person about anything paranormal, religious beliefs, concepts like auras or energies or anything like that. But this story is mostly about my mother, who decided to share it with me one day when I was a bit older. But first, I'll start with a small anecdote of mine that I believe could be connected to this story. So when I was between 5 and 8 years old, I lived with my mother in my great-grandmother's old house. At the time, I had many stuffed animals, toys, and makeup kits for kids. Every time I came home from school, I would find my toys scattered pretty much everywhere, and many of them would even go missing. The most striking thing, though, happened to me was when my mum asked me to go and tell my uncle, who lived further back on the property, that we were leaving with him in the morning in his car. At the time, I was unpacking one of my disorganized makeup kits. After informing my uncle, I returned to find the kit completely organized. I went to my mum and I asked her if she had done it. She looked confused at first, and I noticed a certain sort of seriousness in her face. Then suddenly she smiled and said, "Yes, sweetie, it was me. I just wanted to play a little prank on you." After that, I didn't give it too much thought. At the time, I used to sleep with her in a big bed, and one night, while we were sleeping, my mum got up and saw my great-grandmother putting a dish in the kitchen. My mum asked her if she had organized the makeup kit that I had spoken to her about, and my great-grandmother, confused, said that she hadn't and had been resting the entire time. But something that caught my attention was when she said, "They've probably come back. They're back." My mum returned and I pretended to be asleep. Now, the next day, she took me to my grandmother's house to stay for a week. And when I came back, everything was normal and eventually I forgot about it. But since then, many strange things have happened to me, but I didn't pay much attention to them, I guess you could say. Now, here's my mother's story. So not long ago, she asked me if I remembered what happened with the makeup kit, and I said yes, of course. She then told me that when she was 6 years old, she lived in that same house with her grandmother, my great-grandmother, and slept in the same room where we used to sleep. Her grandmother had her own room, and she said that she used to hear small footsteps inside of her room every night. Things would be moved around, clothes would disappear, and objects would even go missing. Now one night, she felt something climb onto her bed, like a cat had jumped onto it. She got scared and hid under the covers, when suddenly, something spoke to her from the darkness. It introduced itself with a very tiny voice and asked her not to turn on the light. And from that night on, everything changed. They visited her every night, talking to her. She would ask them who they were and what they wanted, and these things simply said that they were her friends and had come to visit her because they liked her. As the nights went on, she started to have doubts and became afraid. These voices would tell her to go with them, that they would take her to beautiful places full of colors and toys. Over time, they got closer and even began to touch her. She described their hands as very tiny, like a newborn baby's hands. One night, one of them even pulled her hair playfully, and that's when she started to get really worried. They kept insisting that she crawl under the bed for some reason. The fear grew so much that she asked her grandmother if she could sleep in her room, telling her that the goblins wanted to take her away. My great-grandmother, who was very religious but didn't believe in fantasy, agreed to sleep with her in her room eventually. And while they slept, these things returned and woke my mother up. She could feel them pulling on her clothes, trying to sort of drag her under the bed a bit. She finally managed to wake her grandmother, and before too long, her grandmother suddenly stood up, turned on the light, and they both heard things scurrying around the room. Crying, my mother explained everything that she had heard all those nights. Her grandmother told her not to worry, and admitted that she had heard them too. She carried my mother to her own room and locked my mother's bedroom with a padlock. The next morning, very early, they called people from the church to come and inspect the house. They didn't doubt my great-grandmother too, as she was considered to be a wise and truthful woman. And when they moved the bed, there was a hole in the floor, about the size of my mother, and very deep, as she described it. Well, they sealed it with cement that day and placed wooden planks over it too. When my mum told me this story, I asked my great-grandmother about it while she was still alive, and she confirmed my mother's story and shared what she had heard as well. From then on, every time I visited that house, it always gave me an eerie feeling. My mum said that she was afraid these things might have come back for me. Since they sealed the hole, they never bothered her again, but I still can't explain what happened with my makeup set and all of the stuffed animals that I've lost. Whatever the case may be, it's a very skin-crawling story, isn't it? I lived in a modest apartment on the top floor of an old building, with nothing above me but a dusty attic. When I moved in, I thought that I was finally escaping the chaos of my old shared place. The neighborhood was quiet, my neighbors kept their distance, and the attic overhead felt, well, reassuring to be honest, like a buffer between me and the night sky. I think I first noticed something strange one evening as I was drifting off to sleep. In the silence, I heard cautious footsteps directly above my ceiling. The attic was supposed to be sealed off, so I told myself that it was probably rats, maybe a stray cat, and I should do something about that. But the next night, at the exact same time, the footsteps returned. Soft creaks, the sound of fabric brushing against wood like a body trying to move silently. Feeling uneasy, I questioned my landlord, and he insisted no one has accessed that attic for years. It's locked and empty, probably just the old wood settling. I wasn't convinced, so I propped a chair under the attic hatch. It was secured with a heavy rusted padlock, and yet the following night, I woke to a gentle groan of hinges. The hatch had shifted. The padlock still hung there, but slightly angled, as if it had been opened and carefully put back. My heart hammered so violently that day that I felt dizzy. The next morning, I bought a small camera and positioned it high on a wardrobe, aiming it at the hatch. That night, the noises came again, subtle and measured. At sunrise, I replayed the footage with trembling hands. The hatch, it had lifted a fraction, and a pale, grimy hand had emerged through the crack, groping in the darkness as if searching. Not an animal's paw, this was unmistakably human, which meant that somebody was up there, suspended in eerie silence, watching me sleep below. I called the police immediately. They promised to send a patrol and urged me to leave the apartment, but it was late and the idea of stepping into the night honestly felt worse. I grabbed a kitchen knife. I barricaded my door and sat on my bed trembling and listening. Around 3 a.m, that was when I heard a scratching sound, this time beneath my bed. My blood turned to ice. The attic was above, not below, so how could anyone be under my floorboards? I pressed my ear to the wood, and the sound repeated. Something, or someone, was crawling, slithering into a space that really shouldn't exist. I remembered reading that the building once had another level that was later sealed off. But could there be a hidden crawl space? just large enough for a desperate deranged person to nest in. I wanted to run, but fear held me in place. Suddenly, the noises crept toward my front door. I heard it strain and creak as something tried to force it open. I dialed emergency services, voice shaking, pleading for help, and they said that the patrol was close and told me to stay calm. Then the pounding on the door stopped. Silence. Agonizing minutes passed until the police finally arrived. They searched my apartment thoroughly, but there was nothing. The hatches were closed, no sign of a break-in. I was half crazed, begging them to check the attic. Finally, they forced the lock, and inside, they found old boxes, scraps of food, a filthy blanket, and also what seemed to be my name carved into a beam. Tacked to a wall were candid photos of me as well, taken from outside of my own building at different hours. The officers, they looked really unnerved at this. They found no alternate exits, no tunnels, just a cramped space that honestly reeked of stale sweat and something sinister. I fled that same morning into a friend's place, and the next day I returned briefly for my belongings. And that was when I discovered that in my mailbox was an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid. Me, standing in my living room that night before, talking to the police. The photo, it had been taken from inside of my apartment somewhere. Somehow, this person, he had outsmarted me, eluded the authorities, and watched me from every angle, above, below, through the walls I once thought were solid. I will never know how he slipped in and out unseen like that because I left. I'll never learn his name, but to the man who lurked beneath my floorboards and in my attic, if you ever hear this, know that I would rather lose my mind than ever meet you face to face. Don't ever come looking for me. Not ever. This happened to me in the early 80s when I was about 14 or 15 years old. So I lived on a quiet street in the suburbs of my city, in a small place that you wouldn't call the countryside, but close, in a Spanish island of the Atlantic Ocean. It was known locally back then that little girls started disappearing more often, but it wasn't yet a topic of conversation between the towns and neighborhoods. Most of my friends lived in the city, so I would often take the bus to go and meet them. That day at around 5 or 6 p.m., I decided to start walking to the bus stop, since I was going to meet my friend that evening anyway. The bus stop wasn't actually that far from my house, maybe half a mile in distance. It was located on a quiet street with a few cars or people around, and lined with old street lamps, and they always flickered even in the daylight. I had taken this route so many times that I didn't really think anything of it. When I got there, the street was dead and had no cars or nobody to be seen around, so I just stood up for a few minutes, waiting for my bus. A while later, a white van slowly approached my direction and started slowing down right next to the bus stop. I didn't think too much of it, like maybe they were just parking or looking for something. But then, 2 men got out and started walking towards me. One of them looked normal enough, but the other man caught my attention because his face was kind of, well, deformed, I guess, with one hollow eye socket where his left eye should have been. His other eye locked onto mine, and the intensity of his gaze made me freeze on the spot. Before I could even process what was happening, they had a hold of me. One grabbed my arm with a grip so tight that it felt like my bones were about to snap, and the other wrapped his arm around my waist, dragging me towards the van. Neither of them said a word, although to be honest, their silence was worse than anything they could have said, I think. I started screaming and kicking as hard as I could, but there was literally nobody that I could see around. I remember I even started yelling, "Fire, fire!" since my mum had told me that it was like a code for people who were getting abducted. It really was a horrible feeling seeing myself getting pulled closer to that van, knowing that I couldn't do anything to avoid it. They shoved me into the van, and as I landed on the floor, I saw a third man with a bandana covering his face, and a Doberman that was staring at me with a disgusting, creepy face that honestly still haunts me to this day. It was in that moment that I started to think that no one would help me or even hear me at all. I started struggling and fighting back, and I kind of managed to get them off of me for a second, but they kept grabbing me and pulling me back in. I also remember this distinctive metallic smell inside the van, like rust or maybe blood. I felt like probably the luckiest person on earth when, out of nowhere, my older brother showed up. He didn't live with us at the time, so coincidentally he was probably visiting us that day. I don't really remember why he was there, but boy was I thankful that he was. He started yelling and throwing punches at the men. In the struggle, they let go of me, and I managed to pull myself free and back away. The men seemed to be caught off guard, and after a few seconds of fighting, they ran back to their van, slammed the doors, and sped off. Right after that moment, we ran home, and I started crying in desperation. The walk home was hard, since my legs were shaking non-stop. I felt overwhelmed, and I couldn't really process what had just happened to me. People who have experienced something similar to this, you know how shocked and paranoid you start feeling after it. And well, we reported it to the police later that night, but really they didn't do much. Things like this just weren't taken very seriously back then, unfortunately. For a bit of context, this happened about 2 years ago, a few weeks after my little brother was born. Ever since we moved into this house, there's been this small room in the basement that's always been locked. To show you how little anybody uses it, I still don't really know what's even in there, but I've always assumed that it's just a utility room for like meters or something. The room, though, is really tiny, barely big enough to lie down in. Now, my parents went away for a weekend together, leaving me, my older sister, and my baby brother, who was just a few weeks old at the time, at home. My parents trusted us to take care of ourselves since we'd done this before, plus my sister was pretty old at this time. I was also pretty grown up at this stage as well. Anyway, that night my sister went out with some friends and wasn't planning to come back until 4 or 5 in the morning. I watched a good movie, and since it was already getting late, I decided to put my little brother into bed in his room upstairs. I did that as he was asleep and came back down to watch another movie, but I ended up falling asleep at some stage. I would say probably about 2 or 3 hours later, around midnight, I woke up to these strange noises coming from upstairs. At first I thought it was just the neighbors, since they can be pretty loud and the walls are thin here. But then I looked at the time and I realized that it was far too late for them to still be awake, let alone making that kind of noise. So I got closer to the stairs to investigate, and just as I was about to go up the first step, I heard the sound of something metal falling on the ground. It was the key to the small room in the basement. I immediately grabbed my phone, and instead of calling the police, I texted my friends to tell them what was happening. One of my friends had the great idea of calling the police for me, and suddenly I heard the bathroom door slam shut. I knew that it was that door because it makes a very specific creaking noise when it closes. I remembered my brother was sleeping upstairs, so I carefully went up to check if he was okay. Thankfully, he was fine. And still not fully grasping just how much danger I was in, I went to the bathroom door, and since it opens inwardly, I decided to violently push it open, and when I did this, I heard a man scream. I immediately shut the door and held it closed to keep him from getting out. He broke the window, and outside the bathroom there's this sort of balcony, Not a proper one, but it's sort of like a tiny little area that you can stand on. You get the idea, but it connects to the balconies of the neighboring houses, which are really close together, and he used this to escape. I grabbed my brother in my arms, ran to the kitchen, and noticed that one of the knives was missing from the knife block. I picked up another knife and crouched in the corner of the living room, crying like I never had before. The police arrived. I opened the door for them, and when they searched the house, they confirmed that the bathroom window was indeed broken, and apparently I had hit the guy so hard that there was blood on the floor. But the most shocking and perhaps traumatizing part was what they found in that small basement room. There were blankets, cans of food, and they concluded that someone had been living there for several days. So, an important bit of context here is that I'm an order chaplain for the Order of St. John, a 1,000-year-old Christian order. It is a part of my professional role to investigate and bless areas, people, or buildings that have reported spiritual activity. Usually, it's not spiritual activity. It's someone letting their beliefs cloud their logical analysis. There's almost always a logical reason, but anyway, I digress. So, these are two of the best or least explainable stories that I have that I'd like to share with you guys. The first one is really simple. My wife and I were asleep and there was a really loud howl next to her on her side of the bed that woke us both up. I thought that it was the dog at first, but the dog was sitting there looking between her and I, and it was confused too. We both heard a long wolf-like howl right next to her, and it was just very strange. The other is probably the best ghost story that I have from the job, and I was blessing a house and there was a stairway that switched directions in the middle. The client had a big mirror up on that middle kind of platform, I guess you could call it, where the stairs switched directions. Now, if I see, feel, or hear anything while blessing, I never talk to the clients about it. But the worst thing that you can do as a spiritual professional is affirm their beliefs on this stuff, because no doubt they will be seeking evidence to justify their beliefs so that they feel less crazy. So, I was blessing upstairs, and when I come out of the bedroom, the door of which was right off the stairs, I turned to go back down and I saw a woman in a blue floral dress with really long wet brown hair standing at the base of the stairs with her back to the stairs facing the lounge. And it wasn't just a brief moment. I was looking at them the whole time in the mirror going down the stairs toward the middle platform. I thought the client had a visitor come in that I didn't hear about, so I readied myself to greet them and ask them if I could get past. When I turned the corner, though, they were just gone. I sort of pretended to be blessing the stairs and turned around to look into the mirror, and nothing. I went back to the top of the stairs, but nothing there either. I was talking to the client later. I hadn't mentioned the woman, and I told her to tell me exactly what she thinks is going on there and what she's seen. She listed off a few really explainable things that I noted, and then said, "Oh yeah, and then there's this woman on the stairs who stands at the top of the stairs. She always looks at me from the bedroom door. She has a blue dress and really long brown hair. I can't usually see any features on her face though." And that is probably the only moment I've really dealt with. I've had plenty of, this might be spiritual, but I feel like I'm just missing something moments. But this one was the most concrete one I've ever had, because if she had just told me about it, as she just did, I would have thought, a hypnagogic hallucination or something. But, I mean, I saw it too, and then she explained it. I still scratch my head, to be honest, about this one, and it's one that always sits uneasily with me. Anyway, I'm always happy to chat and answer any questions you guys might have, so feel free to drop a comment below if you're looking for advice on spiritual stuff or whatever. Just note too that I'm a Christian chaplain, but I don't strictly apply Christian methods. I'm from an indigenous branch of Christianity. So for a little bit of context, I've been working for a pizza chain in Australia for around 2 years as a delivery driver. I've seen some things that you would generally expect, like drunken idiots, generally sus people. Someone even robbed me for the pizzas once. Rarely, though, have I ever had anything else weird happen, but I have had 2 paranormal encounters while I was on the job. Now, the first one happened a few months in after I started. I was delivering an order to a part of the town that was further out, a few houses dotted here and there. I was driving along this road. Each side there was grass and reeds about as tall as the car, which was an old 2004 Toyota Corolla. It was around maybe 1.5 meters tall, just under 5 feet. But as I was driving down this road, this thing sprinted across the road on all fours, tilted its head at me while it ran, and ran on through to the other side. Now, the only way that I could describe this thing was that it had a dog head which looked like a part of its jaw was missing and I could see its teeth. But it did look like it had dog teeth, perhaps. I couldn't really see the other half of it, but whatever it was, it didn't have fur or anything like that. It also did not have a tail, and its skin looked like it belonged to a human, perhaps. It had what I presumed to be cuts and dirt marks around its neck, but it did move way too fast to see the rest of its body, so I can't be totally sure. When the headlights hit it, its eyes were this creamy white color. It came around just at the start of the windscreen when looking at it, which would have made it around 80 or so centimeters tall, maybe around 2'7". The way that it ran, though, was really strange as well. Almost like it was galloping, I want to say. It lifted its back feet up to its front and sprung itself forward with its upper body. I did some research into the area that I live in, and there aren't too many paranormal encounters or alleged cryptids or anything, and nothing matched its description at all. I also asked one of my friends who was indigenous, and he couldn't think of any legends that matched what I had described. Granted, indigenous populations are pretty sparse in Australia, and it's hard to find someone who is traditionally from the area that you live in, particularly in my region. So, if anyone has any possible ideas on this event, I would really love to know. The next encounter happened around 2 or so months after the previous one. So I was delivering a pizza to the more suburban part of the city. This street that I was on was pretty much, if you looked up one direction, you would be facing a soccer field, and if you looked the other, you would be facing this graveyard. I finished delivering this order, and I got this sudden, I don't know, like an intense feeling of like being watched. So I pretty much sprint back to the car and hop inside, locking the doors behind me. I looked behind me, which would have been facing the cemetery. There's nothing there. I start up the car and go to readjust the rearview mirror because I accidentally bumped it with one of those insulated food cells on the way in. I looked into the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw, standing behind me from maybe around 2 meters or so, there was this tall, dark figure. Seeing that, I instantly sped off and I didn't look back. I also had one other experience while driving in this same area, but this one happened when I was off the job actually. I was driving back home from a town close by, and this road has some areas which are reasonably wooded. Like, you can still see what's out there, but it's just that there's still a few trees around and it can be a little difficult at times. But I was at one of these areas when suddenly out of nowhere, this woman in this really long white dress walked out onto the road and just stopped right in front of me. I instantly slammed my brakes. I knew that I was going to miss her as she was still around 10 meters or so in front of me, and I was already going fairly slow because it was a wet road, luckily. However, before I fully stopped, she just completely vanished. She was gone. Nothing was left behind at all. Honestly, the best way that I can describe it, it was like someone was edited out of a video and just cut her out. It was like a blink and she was just gone. If anyone has any ideas about any of these encounters, but especially the first one, I would really, really love to hear from you. So I used to live in Nova Scotia, Canada, more specifically in the Sambro-Ketch Harbour area, and if you've ever been around this area, you've probably heard of Sambro Island, and its absolutely beautiful lighthouse and very cool history. My first time hearing this story, and the actual story itself, takes place on this island. I'll try to tell you exactly how the story goes, based off of what I remember. So way back when the lighthouses still needed lightkeepers to stay running, oftentimes they would be on the islands for months before returning home. Because of that, and also the living conditions on the island, things like insanity, depression, paranoia, loneliness, and even suicide were unfortunately quite common. I'm not sure exactly when this takes place, but I do know that it was in the 1700s or maybe early 1800s. So the active lightkeeper on the island was, as you can imagine, depressed, lonely, and always super tired due to the requirement that they wake up multiple times a night to make sure that the light stays on at all times. Eventually, he couldn't stand his life anymore, and unfortunately he hung himself from the railing of the spiral staircase inside of this lighthouse. His body, unfortunately, stayed there for many months before they sent a ship out to pick him up to take him home. Of course, all they found was a pretty big mess, and his body was removed and given a proper sea burial. However, it took much longer to remove the horrible stench that had come from the whole event, because it was all over the wooden stairs and railings of the lighthouse. But once the smell had finally subsided, they sent another lightkeeper out to take the man's place. However, it only took 2 weeks for this lightkeeper to take the boat that they had supplied him, that they now realized was a good idea, and flee from the island out of fear. According to the man, he would often smell cigarette smoke and the smell of rot at the top of the lighthouse and around other parts of the island where the man had never even been. Apparently, he caught glimpses of the dead lightkeeper with a lantern, roaming the island and around the lighthouse at all hours of the day. Of course, the common loneliness and paranoia, in addition to these occurrences, was enough to drive him mad, and so he fled the island. It is said to this day that if you visit that island and get the feeling that you're being watched, well, you most likely are, and you should leave immediately. However, if you don't leave fast enough or do something to irritate the lightkeeper, there's a good chance that you may smell cigarette smoke on your boat, even after you've left the island. This happened over a decade ago when I was 12 years old. I live in a small town in Oklahoma, and in my neighborhood the houses are fairly spread apart, separated by woods. It was a school day, so my grandma picked me up from school and brought me home that day. This was the first year that I got dropped off at my house alone, because before this, I would just go to my grandma's house after school. I would get dropped off at around 3 p.m. and my parents would be home at around 4:30. Not that big of a deal. Well, today for some reason, my dad wasn't going to be home until later, around 7, and my mum, who was a teacher, wouldn't be home until around 8 p.m. because she had parent-teacher conferences at school that day. This happened in the early fall, so it wouldn't even be dark until at least 8:30. So I did what I usually did when I get home. I ran upstairs, got on my Xbox 360, and just played some Minecraft with my friends. Today it was just me and my friend Seth, and I was playing for about 2 hours when I heard a car door shut in my driveway. No one should have been here until like 7 p.m. at least. My house is set up to where my upstairs has windows that look over my driveway, so with my mic on and controller in hand, I went to the window to see who it was. I mean, maybe my dad had got home earlier than expected or something. I looked outside. It was a red truck, no one I know drives a red truck. Well, the person pulled into the middle of my driveway, but the weird thing is that he was sideways, like he owned the place. When I looked out the window, I saw a man with a hat, wearing a big camo hoodie and jeans. It was September, so no one should have been wearing a big hoodie and jeans in Oklahoma at this stage. By the time that I looked, he was already almost out of view, going up to my walkway to my front door. I thought maybe it was one of my dad's friends or something, or someone my dad hired to do something, but he would usually tell me if someone was going to be coming over. Well, soon after I hear a knock at the door, then another, so I go to my other window that was a better view of the walkway up to my front door, and I see this guy walking back down the walkway. I switch and go back to looking through the windows, overlooking my driveway. I'm relaying all of this to Seth, mind you, still on the mic with me. I tell Seth that he's walking back to his truck now. Instead, though, he walks past his truck and suddenly tries to open my garage side door. At this point, my heart instantly sinks. I tell Seth that this guy just tried to get into my house. He's trying to break in. Mind you, it's literally broad daylight at like 5 p.m. Luckily it was locked because sometimes we do forget to lock it, but this day we hadn't. After he tried the door, he starts walking to my back patio. I instantly drop my headset and I quietly run down the stairs to see what he was doing. I get downstairs and stand behind the wall so that I'm not visible from the back door or living room windows, and I just listen. I hear him try to open the door, then I hear a thud. It sounded like he maybe dropped a brick on the ground or something. At this point, I'm more scared than I've ever been. I wanted to call my parents or grandma, but I didn't have a cell phone yet. The only phone in the house was in my kitchen, and I would have to cross my living room to get there, and he would definitely be able to see me if I went into there. A few seconds after the thud, I peeked around the corner and he was gone. I run back upstairs and put my headset back on, telling Seth that he just tried to open the back door as well. As I'm telling this, I hear a car door shut, and this time when I look out the window, he seems to have finally gotten into his truck. I looked at the truck closer, and I noticed that the only thing that he has in his truck bed was a crowbar and a shovel. He sat in his truck for what felt like a few minutes, and during this time, Seth told me to get my iPod out and take a picture of his license plate. Problem was, though, is that he was parked sideways, so I couldn't really see it. Then, he drove backwards out of my driveway and down the road so fast that I just couldn't get a picture. A few minutes after he was confirmed gone, I went downstairs to see what the thud could have been. I get to the back door and I can see that the doormat was moved. Both big plant pots had been moved as well, which means that he was definitely looking for a key. We do have a hidden key back there too. The key to the back door was under one of the smaller pots on a ledge near the door, not the bigger ones that he had checked under. I went to the front porch and all of those pots were looked under as well because they'd definitely been moved. Truly, I counted my blessings that day. Genuinely, I really don't know what I would have done if he would have found that key, or if he had just broken in. After he left, I quickly called my dad and told him what had happened. When my dad got home, he had a cop come over and I told him what happened and gave him a description. Thankfully, the guy never came back, but I also don't think that they ever caught him either. This past Monday, I went to bed with my girlfriend. We had stayed up watching TV till early hours of the morning and went to sleep at around 3 or 4 a.m. I lay in bed for ages trying to fall asleep, but I struggled. Not unusual for me. At some point, though, I started to feel very uneasy and just had this overwhelming feeling come over me. I started to feel like I was drifting into sleep paralysis, but I could still move. In fact, I deliberately kept moving around to avoid sleep paralysis, but this feeling grew stronger and stronger, and I could hear noises outside of the bedroom, and in the dark room I could see what I could only describe as a shape. I couldn't quite make out what it was though, and I felt like something was here with me. I tried to fight this feeling for a few minutes before I gave up as I felt whatever it was right there next to me. I started to hear weird noises and what sounded like throat singing or vocalization by Native Americans or something similar. I then sat up and woke my girlfriend up. I suddenly felt a strong sense of dread. Then I experienced what felt like a strong vibrating or magnetic force trying to pull me up. At the same time, I was what I can only describe as spoken to in my mind by various different voices, which sounded like vibratory robotic voices. These voices were telling me to let go and come with them. When I closed my eyes, I could see the shapes of your typical alien grey, as well as other shapes that I couldn't make out and was too scared to focus on. These voices, though, were telling me that they can share power, knowledge, and enlightenment of which I cannot begin to comprehend. I had a strong gut feeling not to trust these entities or whatever was going on. I'm a devout Muslim, and I started reciting Quranic verses in my head and the declaration of my faith. But these entities, they didn't seem to like this and made the vibrating feeling and the feeling of dread 10 times worse. They told me that there's higher entities. I also asked my girlfriend to play the Quran in the background, which started to sound very distorted all of a sudden. While all of this was going on, my heart was racing to a beat that I had never felt before, and I could feel it literally pounding in my chest. My head was pounding and my eyes were really sore all of a sudden too. During this experience, I was questioning if I was beginning to lose my mind, as you can imagine. I am of sound mind though, and I've never had any psychotic or manic episodes or ever shown signs of any mental illness. After this episode, my comprehension of time, though, was really distorted for about 24 hours. What I mean is that I stayed in bed after this for the whole day, and I didn't realize how much time had gone by. I also had a crushing headache, which has only just eased today. My eyes felt really sore, like the pain that I experienced after laser eye surgery, and the tip of my nose was also very sore, as well as dried blood in my nose after the experience. But this also brings up another thing. It had me thinking about the time that I had sleep paralysis a few years ago. It was a proper sleep paralysis, and it was of a 4-foot-tall, typical alien grey-shaped figure visiting me. This new experience, it has me questioning whether that sleep paralysis was, well, sleep paralysis at all, or something else, or if it's somehow related at all. Since this experience, I have been very disassociated. I've barely left my room and just feel, well, generally uneasy, I guess you could say. I have this fear that it's going to happen again, and I do believe that I was visited by something. Whether extraterrestrial, demonic, or something else, I really don't know, but it definitely has me questioning everything ever since. I've always believed my house was normal, nothing strange or creepy about it. Mostly because it's a relatively new building, I suppose, built in the 90s, and I live alone. I like the idea of not having neighbors too close, so I chose a house in a more isolated area. But for the past few weeks, there's been something happening here that I can't explain. It all started one night when, around 2 a.m., I just sort of woke up suddenly. There was no noise, but I had that strange feeling of not being alone. I turned toward the door of my bedroom, and that was when I noticed it. The closet door down the hallway was slightly ajar. Now, I always make a habit of closing every door in the house before going to bed, just to avoid waking up and seeing half-open doors in the dark that creep me out. So I thought maybe I had forgotten to close it. even though I felt a little bit uneasy by it. In the end, I decided to get up and shut it and just sort of forget about it. I closed it properly this time, pulling it until I heard the click of the latch. I went back to bed, trying not to think about it, but it took a while before I finally fell back asleep. Now, the next night, the same thing happened. Around 2 in the morning, I wake up again, and the closet door is open again, even though I had definitely closed it. This time, I got a chill down my spine, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I hadn't closed it properly? In the following days, though, the situation worsened. Every single night, I woke up at the same time, and every night, that door was open, no matter how carefully I closed it. So one evening, I decided to place a chair against the door so I could hear it if anything moved. But when I woke up, I found that the chair had definitely shifted, and the door was now slightly open. There were no signs of forced entry, no animals or strong winds that could have moved it. And every night, always at the same time, that door keeps opening. I cannot sleep anymore, and I'm starting to think that maybe I'm really not alone in this house. So I was just driving home from hanging out with some friends, and I saw a stray dog trotting up the street. It was about 10:45 p.m. and I've always been an avid animal lover, spending my childhood begging my parents to let me help stray animals or take them home. And now that I'm an adult, I have my own dog but carry extra dog food and a lead in my car, just in case I happen to across a pup in need. Now, this dog was running down a pretty busy road and then turned onto a side street, so I decided to stop to see if I could get it to come to me with some food. I called it, and it definitely looked interested for a moment. I dropped some food on the sidewalk, but then it took off. I got back into my car and turned left at the next street, and then left again to get back onto the main road. I see the dog again, and it's moving more slowly now, so I think maybe there's a better chance that I can get it to come to me. I stop again, and as I'm getting out of my car, a large Suburban drives by. I stare at them directly because I'm worried they won't see the dog and they might actually hit them. I lose sight of the dog while I'm watching the Suburban, which then turns around. They pull up next to my parked car and stop. I walk 1 to 2 steps forward, waiting for them to roll down their passenger window, but the guy rolls down the driver's side window, opposite side, and I ask, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but is that your dog?" He says something indiscernible and then gets out of the vehicle, and I realize that he's actually wearing a ski mask. He says, "What are you doing? I saw you outside of my house." To clarify, I never left the road or the sidewalk at all. I hold up my bag of dog food and lead and say, there was a dog and I was trying to get it to come to me." At the same time, I move towards my car and open the door with my hand on the lock as he's moving toward me. The dude then hustles back into his Suburban and basically peels out of there, turns off the street without stopping at the stop sign. I don't know what his intentions were, but I'm genuinely grateful to be home and on the couch with my dog now. I hate that I feel stupid and regretful for trying to do a kind task of helping an animal in need. I feel like it's going to deter me from doing it again in the future, in fact. I don't want to tell my fiancé or friends about it because they'll probably tell me that I shouldn't have stopped. But how is this world ever going to become a better place if everyone just stops doing good deeds out of fear? It was around 9 or 10 p.m. and I, male and 16, was skateboarding at a skate park around 5 minutes away from my house. I don't have a car yet, so I usually just skate there, and usually I do have to deal with some creepy or strange people because, well, I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and in a not great part of town, so that's pretty much a common thing here. Now this night, I went alone and there was only one other person at the park who I had met there for the first time. We had a pretty good time and we skated for around maybe about an hour, just me and him. But eventually a guy with a child came walking into the skate park and he came up to us. The first weird thing that I noticed though is that the child that he had no shoes and was wearing pants and a t-shirt, even though it was pretty cold outside, even for me with a hoodie on. Another thing that was strange too was that he had what seemed to be a gun with him. I noticed the guy had some tattoos and was around 6 foot maybe. But this guy first starts talking to the guy that I was skating with and tells him that he cuts hair and if he ever needs a barber to hit him up. My friend says thanks and then he walks over to me and says the same thing. I just say, "Oh, alright, thank you," and thought that he would leave, but no. He asks if his son could try my board. I was a little hesitant at first, but I said, "Alright." I mean, the child didn't seem to want to even try. He had to pick him up by his arms and put him on it. Eventually, though, the child stands on it and is trying it. While he's doing that, the guy turns to me and repeats himself, saying that he's a barber and that he's just here with his nephew. I thought it was really weird, though, that he had just said that he was his son first, and now he's saying that this kid's his nephew. Well, skipping ahead like 10 minutes, my friend leaves me there and the guy is still there. He asks me to do a trick for his nephew, and while I'm doing it, forces him to watch by holding his head in place towards me. After I do it, he repeats himself again, saying that he's a barber if I ever need a cut and that he's here with his son. I then sort of confront him and say, "Didn't you say that he was your nephew?" To which he says, "Oh yeah, sorry, I get it confused sometimes, my bad." I just shrug it off and tell him that I need to go. He then says, yeah, his dad's coming to pick us up now anyway. So I'm leaving and I look back and he's getting into a car. I'm not actually going home yet, obviously. I was just skating to McDonald's to have something to eat, but I then see the car drive off, but instead of going in the opposite direction, he goes the same way that I'm going to the same McDonald's. He comes up to me again and says, "Hey, what a weird coincidence. I was hungry too," or something like that. At that point, there was something sus going on, so I just leave, but not before he repeats himself again and asks for my number. But I say no thanks and I just get out of there. He was a really weird guy, and I wonder if that kid was even his kid in the end. I don't know what was going on, but the whole situation just seemed really sus. For a little bit of backstory, I, a 19-year-old female, used to live in Western Australia, Perth, with my mother and my stepfather. This story happened when I was in Year 5. I was about 10 years old. Moving was rather difficult for me in Year 4. A new place, a new school, new siblings. But I was finally away from the abuse and the torture of my old home, so I was pretty thankful for that. Thankfully, too, after a year, things got a bit easier for me. While my mental health was still a bit of an issue, I was settling in nicely with this new school. Just a few months before my birthday in Year 5, my class and another Year 5 class, they organized an excursion to Fremantle Prison as a history lesson in some sense. While I was nervous because it wasn't a place that I was familiar with, I had my friends to lean on if I was a bit overwhelmed. Once we arrived on the bus, the tour guide took us through the old prison. I was honestly amazed at the history and the layout. It was truly a pretty interesting place. Eventually, the guide took us to the second floor, and we stopped on the side as the guide taught us about the safety nets that were in between the stairs and how it was in place because the inmates, apparently they would attempt to either self-delete or others by pushing or jumping off the guardrails. As he was talking about it, I sort of subconsciously looked to the side, being the curious 10-year-old that I was, down the halls where the cells were. For those who know about Fremantle Prison, You might also know that it's said to be haunted by inmates that had died there in the past. Well, as I looked down the hall, holding my friend's hand because I was a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of people that were there, I noticed something. A person. I don't just mean a shadow too, a whole person. He was middle-aged, maybe around 45 to 50, but the weirdest thing is that this guy was completely naked. Well, except for some white underwear, and had a large wound on his head. We sort of stared at each other for a good 10 seconds before he walked into a cell and just disappeared from sight. But the cell doors were shut. He shouldn't have been able to do that, which means that he must have just phased through the door. I was horrified. I held my friend's hand tighter and shuffled so I was stood behind them. "What's wrong?" they asked, their voice soft and kind like always. I didn't respond. I mean, even if I wanted to, my voice just wouldn't come out. My friend stared at me for a moment before sighing. I'm guessing they assumed I was a little bit shaken by the whole inmate self-deletion thing, and wrapped their arm around my shoulders, keeping me close. Now, I know my mental state back then was pretty terrible, and I had and still do have some hallucinations due to trauma I went through, but I genuinely believe that must have been something else. My hallucinations were never and are never that detailed. Anytime I see a person, it's usually just sort of a shadow, but this guy looked completely real. I've never talked about this with, well, anyone, not even my therapist, because honestly, just thinking about it makes me paranoid. I came here to tell you guys this story because it seemed like a place that I could share it, and I really, really needed to get it off of my chest. When I, male and 25, was little, 3 or 4, my family lived in a city with many historic buildings and houses that were built in the late 1800s. Our house, it was one of these historic buildings, so there were a lot of public records available for it, and that will be relevant later. And the house was even featured as a part of the local historical bus tour at one stage. In this house, there was a room on the second floor which was always colder than every other room in the house. My parents said that this was due to the room being an addition and subsequently having poorer insulation, but I'm really not sure if that's actually true. The room was small and square and stuck out from the side of the house, so it had windows on 3 walls. While we lived there, this room was designated as my playroom, and all of my toys were kept in there. Well, I used to tell my parents about how a little girl often came to play with me. I described to them that she had brown hair, a white dress with poofy sleeves, and that she was my age and would come in through the window. Again, though, the room was on the second floor. I'm not sure what my parents thought of this at the time, probably chalked it up to my overactive imagination. But a year or so later, we were living in a new house in a new city, and my parents were doing some scrapbooking. They had gotten old newspaper clippings and other documents about the house from these local public records. And at one point, my mum was looking at an old newspaper clipping of the original family who owned the house, and I pointed over her to the daughter in the picture and said to my mum, "That's the little girl that played with me." I saw my family a few days ago at Thanksgiving and was reminded of this while reminiscing. This is one of 2 major paranormal events that have happened to me in my life so far. This was from like 20 years ago now, but it definitely still sticks with me. This first happened in late 2023. I was coming home from a tattoo appointment at about 8 p.m. and my boyfriend was at work. It was really quiet in the house as only one other roommate was still awake. I went into my room to greet my cat and lay down for a bit, and as I was changing my clothes, I heard a distinct, rhythmic breathing coming from under my bed. It was so clear and so human-like, I turned off my music and texted my boyfriend to tell him that I was afraid that someone may be in our room and had broken in. He pointed out that there's no way that a human could fit under our bed. There was nobody in the closet or anywhere else in the room when I was changing, but I still heard the same distinct inhale and exhale for another hour or so at least. My cat was even acting weird, like she could hear it too. I stayed on the bed and turned the TV volume up so that I couldn't hear it as well until I finally couldn't hear it at all. My boyfriend believed me and understood why I was creeped out. Fast forward to early 2024, I was visiting my friend out of town and he texted me to tell me that he could hear it too. The same inhale and exhale, steady and human-like. He said that it was definitely coming from under the bed. We've both heard it once or twice more through the course of this year, and it is unsettling, whatever it is. So I was dating a guy twice my age who I worked at a grocery store with. He had a side job with a morgue where he picks up bodies on call. He takes them to said morgue and does paperwork, tags them, and puts them in the freezer, basically. Genuinely, too, I thought what he did was pretty admirable, because someone needs to do it, right? And death is a bit of a touchy subject, and if you can handle this sort of thing, then I respect it. He made himself out to be a really great person, too, who cares about people, and wants to be that guy who can get the hard stuff done in a caring manner. Unfortunately, though, he turned out to be far, far from that. So later on, I found out that the morgue also does these funeral services and stuff. And because of this, there's little rooms with chairs and such, also an office. And one night, we were supposed to hang out, and he asked me to meet me at the morgue. This was in the middle of the night, nobody else was there. I figured that we'd meet up and leave to get some food or just talk in his car like usual, but instead, he wanted me to come inside this night. He showed me around the little rooms in the office. It was kind of cool, like being in a horror video game, sort of. Then he told me to wait, and he left me in the office. After a few minutes, he texted me, and he gave me some directions and told me to come into a room that I hadn't been in yet. It was the room where they kept all the bodies ready for the freezer and do the paperwork. I didn't know. So I went inside and there was a dead body just out in the open in the middle of the room on a gurney. I literally froze in the doorway because I was not expecting this. I felt like I should be upset, but he thought that it was funny. In the end, I was sort of freaked out and just kind of played it cool. He wanted me to look at it. It was an old lady. I've seen plenty of stuff on the internet, so I thought to myself this wasn't as messed up as it was at the time. He finished up and then took me into the freezer to show me other bodies. There were like 6 in there, in body bags. Only one other one was unzipped. He also showed me the oven where they cremated the bodies. This was all in the middle of the night, mind you. No warning on my part, nobody else in the building, and I kind of just blocked out the memory for a couple of months after it happened. I started having some other issues with this guy, and I ended up telling the story to a friend. And my friend helped me realize that that whole situation was just really messed up. I just thought that I'd share this with you guys too, because since then I've had some issues with this dude, and I finally have him blocked on everything, but this whole situation is going from creepy ex-boyfriend to stalker vibes pretty quickly. Hopefully he leaves me alone, but if he doesn't, then I'll be sure to let you guys know. As surprising as it may be, this is one of those stories that I forgot about until, well, a few days ago, when I was talking to a school friend on call and I was reminded of this. She was pretty freaked out when I told her, and so she recommended that I share it here, so here I am. So this happened when I was roughly maybe 7 or 8, so some of the details are a little bit fuzzy, but I do remember the main parts pretty vividly. This may seem like unimportant context as well, but my family had just moved to America, and were renting the top portion of your regular suburban house in a pretty safe cul-de-sac. I had some friends, they were triplets, about 3 or 4 houses down from us. It really wasn't that far at all, and every day I would hang out with them. Around 9 or 10 in the night, my older brother, around 11 or 12 at the time, would make the 2-minute walk and come and get me, and walk me home since I was pretty young. Now, one night, he came to get me as usual. The sun wasn't fully down, but it was getting pretty dark. We started down the walk as normal when he started casting glances over his shoulder. I didn't really notice as well until he shoved me hard away from the sidewalk and in between 2 houses. Each house had a huge fence that separated their backyard, not ours though, and he made me crouch behind the fence. I remember suddenly being really scared, but more so confused since I had no idea what the heck was going on. More specifically, he was a pretty big prankster. Once he even convinced me that my older sister had actually crashed her car into the ocean. So I didn't really believe him when he turned and said, "Walk behind the houses, I think somebody might be following us." Looking back now, he was probably trying to keep me calm, but whatever calm was left in my tiny 8-year-old body was gone the moment that I turned around and looked. The man had followed us behind the houses, and he was just by the edge of a few houses down near a different fence line. He had a black hoodie on, with the hood up, black sweatpants and white sneakers. I have pretty bad eyesight now due to some health problems, but back then it was absolutely crystal clear, and I could see, with horrifying clarity, that his jaw was sort of hung open. Like, he was just sort of standing there with his jaw hung open. It was horrifying, and I think now that I'm older, maybe he had some kind of medical condition that affected his jaw, or maybe he did crack or something. I don't know, but back then I could have sworn on God that I was seeing some kind of a demon. Anyway, my brother, when he saw me looking and getting really freaked out, told me to just run as fast as I can to our house. And so we absolutely booked it. Neither of us looked back, but we were scared out of our minds, and like I said, we only rented the top portion of the house, so the bottom, with the sliding door in the backyard, belonged to some other tenant at the time. I don't remember if she was home or not, but I remember tugging that thing open and locking it as fast as I could. And when I looked up, he was there in our yard, a little ways away from the door, staring at us. Me and my brother told my sister and my mother immediately. My father was away on a work trip at the time. But in the end, nothing really came of it. Well, not until the day after, at least. You see, we went to go and meet my dad at his warehouse, which had a small live-in portion above it, where he lazed around until he was ready to head home with us. Around dusk, he came up and told us that we might have to wait since the police were there for some reason. He walked us around to the back window of the small area to show the police all around the backyard area of the warehouses, and there were a few in line, to a white van parked on the grass by the edge of the woods. Like I said, I was pretty young, so I don't remember many details of what actually happened, but I do remember my dad, who hadn't been told about the day prior, telling us that they found a man and a woman in the van. The man, he said, had his mouth hung wide open. He seemed really disturbed telling me about the whole thing and wouldn't answer any more questions about the woman. Maybe she was dead, I've got zero idea, but I do know that they were arrested on trespassing charges apparently. I don't really know anything else about it, and I haven't asked about it either, and I doubt that he would actually remember it. It's been over a decade and he's pushing 70 now. But the whole situation just really freaks me out to this day. I still cannot believe it happened, and I don't have any answers for it. I talked to my brother briefly about it in the hopes that he remembered more than I do, but all I got was a long tirade about whatever medical condition the guy probably had for his mouth to be like that. He's one of those annoying medical students now. But sometimes I think maybe he didn't mean any harm and was just drugged out of his mind or something. But this was, like, in the world's safest neighborhood, and also doesn't explain why or how he showed up at my dad's workplace as well. Plus, if he didn't have any nefarious intentions, why did he follow a couple of kids home so late at night? So, some background first. At the time of this event, I was 20 and a firefighter for the US Army. Everybody is always shook when I say that, but army bases are basically walled-in cities, and like any other city, they require firefighters. Anyway, my best friend was in my unit with me, and for the sake of this retelling, we'll call him Jay. Jay and I were on a 48-hour on and 72-hour off schedule, and being two young idiots with more free time than safe, we developed some pretty dumb hobbies. The biggest of which was actually urban exploration. Now, this had nothing to do with the supernatural, as neither of us had any belief in anything supernatural whatsoever, and simply enjoyed the exploration. It sort of felt like being an archaeologist, except one of recent history, I guess. The place that we were stationed in the US was full of abandoned buildings too, or even entire towns within a few hours' drive. For well over a year, we broke into and explored literally hundreds of abandoned structures, with absolutely no supernatural happenings, and it grew to be all that we could really think about. We spent all of our free time exploring or trawling the forums looking for new places to see. And it was on one of these forums that I came across a post about a town, and I mean a tiny town, that apparently had an abandoned colonial-style mansion. I showed Jay this post, and we decided this mansion would be our next exploration. So we drove the 2 hours from our duty station to this little town, and found a town that consisted of 3 streets, 1 gas station, 1 county tornado shelter, and well, that's about it. I'm talking super tiny town in the middle of the woods in the southeast United States. Well, we went into the gas station and asked the clerk about the mansion, but she claimed to never have heard of it. I should point out at this point as well that the entire town just gave off a really bad vibe. As a former skeptic, I realize how dumb that really sounds, but I just really felt, I don't know, threatened, or maybe oppressed is the better way to say it. Something like that by the entire place, for no real reason. The couple of people that we spoke to, they were nice enough, and the place, while perhaps a bit southern poor Methville-ish, was far from the worst area that we had entered in search of an abandoned place to explore. The only thing that I noticed odd about the town, though, was, for as small as it was, there were like 5 churches in the town. Not super abnormal for the Bible Belt, I guess, but none of the churches bore classic Christian iconography, like crosses or such. They also had slightly odd names like Church of the Light and other sort of slightly obscure non-denominational names. Again, not that weird, but a little bit strange. Anyway, the first of the weirdness started after we checked into the hotel that we had booked about 15 miles away in the nearest decent-sized city, and came back after dark. Any veteran urban explorer knows to go in after dark and not use bright lights until you're inside the building, unless you want the locals calling the cops on you. So, Jay and I drove all around the town for maybe over an hour, which is pretty impressive considering it was woods, a few fields, and 3 streets looking for the mansion. But we just never found it. We finally parked into the only large parking lot there, the tornado shelter. While we had a smoke and bemoaned the fact that we had wasted time on a false lead, we noticed a group of 5 people walking down the side of the road in our direction. Again, not too odd, but it got really strange when these 5 entered the circle of light created by one of the only 5 streetlights in that town. all in the parking lot of this county tornado shelter, and didn't become any clearer to see. I realize that doesn't sound that scary, but picture this. It's around midnight, give or take about half an hour, and someone is walking up to a lit area. While they approach, they are sort of hard to make out because you're looking at them from an illuminated area into a dark area. They would be hard to see, right? Night vision being what it is and disrupted by the light that you're standing in as well. Nothing odd about that. But when these 5 walked into the light that I was parked under, all 5 did not become illuminated. Again, I know that doesn't really sound all that scary in the telling, but seeing 5 human-shaped dark patches standing directly under a streetlight where anyone, even someone with a dark complexion and black clothing, would have at least had some detail, was weird and terrifying to see. I don't mean that this was a dark person in dark clothing standing in the light. What I mean is this was somehow 5 person-shaped patches of pure black, standing in a well-lit area not even 10 to 15 feet from us. The light had literally no effect on them. Well, at that point, Jay and I said to heck with this, and we just hauled butt out of that town. Now, that was odd and would have been scary enough, but the second and final supernatural effect of my visit were the dreams. I would like to again remind you guys that I never saw the mansion with my own eyes. Jay and I, however, spent nearly a year having the same nightmares about a mansion that, again, I shouldn't be able to really say was there. The dream starts with me walking down a path in the forest for a few seconds before I enter into a clearing and see an old but well-kept 3-story white wood Victorian-style house with a white wood wraparound deck and large wood columns. I walk up the dirt path to 3 wood steps up onto a porch, and then up to the green painted double doors. I suddenly feel sick to my stomach in this place, and feel like something wants me to come inside really badly. But at the same time, I'm 100% certain that I should not enter into this house. Eventually, I open the right double door, and all I can see inside of the house is pitch black. Then I wake up. Now, I know that dream is weird, and look, I get it, it's just a dream. But when you really live through something like this, and it's not a fictional story, it's a really sort of eerie thing to go through. I had that exact same nightmare, and felt the exact same pull to a place that I very much should not enter for almost exactly a year after I went into that god-forsaken town. It was scary enough on its own for me, but it wasn't until a slightly drunken conversation with Jay a couple of years later, after I went to visit him as our army duties had taken us to different places in the world, that he would mention something about the dreams. Obviously, I asked him what he meant, and he would describe the exact same nightmare for almost the exact same amount of time that I had experienced. And, well, that's pretty much it. I still have the dreams once in a while, but for whatever reason, it's always in that town, and I'm 100% certain that there is a mansion there somewhere, and something lives in it. Those events took place over 10 years ago now, and I have a different life now. I'm out of the army, and I am far too old and far too busy with family matters to do urban exploration anymore. But every now and then, I still think about it, and I get the bug to go and do it again. I think that thing, it wanted me to find the mansion and kept trying to get me to come back to it. Really, who knows, right? All I do know is that I will never be going back to that podunk little town. This felt truly like something out of a horror movie. I'm sharing this to look for possible answers of closure, and I have since told the police about this, and the police asked me why I didn't call them as it was happening. So me and my friend, we were in a dark car park by a lake in my city. The lake is surrounded by various car parks and trees, and the closer you get to the lake, the further you are from the main road, which takes you out of the wooded area. My friend and I were parked maybe 5 meters from the lake with the car facing the lake. We were sat there listening to music and just chatting for about 10 minutes, with me in the driver's seat but the ignition off. When all of a sudden my friend, who is looking out of my driver's side window, says to me, "Is that a man standing there?" I laugh and look ahead, and all I see is the dark lake in front of me, and so I say no. But he points his finger at my driver's side window. I turn my head and I see a man with a cat mask covering the top half of his face, standing about 10 meters away, staring at me and not moving. I immediately am extremely freaked out, as you can imagine. The way that he was standing and staring at us through the mask was so unnerving too. I immediately start my car as quick as I could, to which this man starts running towards my driver's side door at full speed. Thankfully, my doors were locked and he stood no chance against my car, but just as we breathed a sigh of relief that the car was now moving, we then see a white ute following closely behind my car. Now, as I've mentioned, we are in this wooded area with dirt roads and several turns which I was not familiar with. Each turn that we made, which were all wrong turns unfortunately, the car would follow us. We were screaming the whole way and not sure what they wanted from us. Eventually, the worst thing that possibly could have happened, and I make the wrong turn into a dead-end car park. The white ute parks on an angle, essentially blocking me in. At this point, I'm genuinely fearing for my life, and the masked man appears from the forest, coming at my car quickly. I drive around, nearly hitting him, and just manage to weasel past the ute parked on an angle. I finally drove out of there going the right way and getting back onto the main road. Now, the scariest part to me about all of this is wondering what they wanted from us. It felt like more than a prank, considering the whole car pursuit and attempted to block us in and all that. I don't know what kind of weapons they had in the car, but I'm pretty confident that there was something in there. I thought that it was possibly an attempted carjacking, but if that was the case, I feel like there would have been more efficient means of doing so, which says to me that they were up to something even worse than that. When I was around 10 or 11 years old, I had a friend whose house that I would stay at frequently. Now, there was one day in particular that my older sibling, my friend, and I had decided to have a sleepover where we all slept on the couch. The couch had this U-shaped layout, so my friend slept on the left side of the couch, I slept in the middle of the couch, and my sibling slept on the right side. My friend's house had this ledge-type area that looked into the kitchen, almost like diners have, and from where I was laying, I had the perfect view of the back door if I just propped myself up a bit. So, I woke up the earliest that morning, around 5 or 6, but it was summer, so the sun was just starting to rise. I could see outside pretty clearly at this point, when out of nowhere, not long after I woke up, I hear 3 knocks at the back door. Nothing weird about the knocks, other than the fact that it was on the back door at like 5 or 6 in the morning. But my friend's sibling was staying out in the garage, so my immediate thought was he must have locked himself out or something. I look up though, and there's nobody at the door. I even get up to look out the window better from a distance, and there's nobody there. I start to get a bit weirded out at this point, so I go lay back down and try to forget about it. But a minute or so later, there are 3 knocks again, but this time they're really slow. I look up and still nobody. I don't get up at this point because I'm pretty freaked out. Another minute goes by and I hear a sort of scraping sound, really long, eerie scrapes at the door, almost as if someone or something is dragging long nails down the door. This time I don't even look up because I'm about to soil myself. I sat there and listened for some time, but nothing happened after that, and I just still can't stop thinking, what was at that door? And what if I had opened it? Could that have just been a prank or something? It's been 8 years since then, and I still think about it a lot. I should add too that later on I asked my friend if her brother was out there to see if by chance it could have been him pulling a prank on us. But she confirmed that her brother was staying with his girlfriend. I wouldn't put it past her to lie, but still, she didn't seem to be lying, and honestly, I don't know what was going on that morning. This is actually my grandmother's story. So, my grandmother slept with her bedroom door closed and lamp on all the time. And one night, she woke up and saw an Asian woman in a green knit sweater standing at the foot of her bed staring at her. In typical Italian fashion, my grandmother began cursing and screaming for this woman to leave, as in the moment she didn't suspect a supernatural or anything, but had actually suspected that this strange woman had broken into her house. Keeping eyes on her, she got up out of bed and grabbed the woman by the wrists and began shaking her. She was screaming in her face to leave or she was going to call the police. She said that she could smell the lady's perfume though, and she was wearing what appeared to be a hospital bracelet on one of her wrists. The Asian lady didn't react to any of this and just sort of stared at her. Grandma backed away from what she thought now was a crazy person to her nightstand, where she turned for a brief moment to pick up the phone and dial 911, and when she turned to face the strange woman, she had just vanished. That's when she noticed that her bedroom door was still shut. She remained in her bedroom until the police arrived. They searched the entire house and found no signs of forced entry. After the police left, she realized that this woman was never looking at her, but was looking through her the entire time. My grandmother lived in this house for decades until her death. Other than this experience, the only other paranormal thing she would talk about was that she would get these whiffs of perfume or cigar smoke. This happened both before and after this incident, and I should note too that she was a smoker, although she certainly didn't smoke cigars. After her death, my family and I spent several days cleaning out her house. It was a rental, and as we did this, we too would get these whiffs of like perfume and cigar smoke all throughout that house. So, was it the paranormal or just residual smells from a woman who smoked and lived in that house for almost 40 years? Grandma's story is a bit creepy, but I don't know. Maybe she just hallucinated something that night. Or maybe she actually did see something. So where I live, there is a local folklore about a man-eating demon called a ghoul in our village. It is said that they live in graveyards and eat the flesh of dead humans who didn't live a righteous life. But sometimes they take the form of a beautiful woman or crying child, trying to attract people at night and eat them alive. It's a pretty well-known story. We've been hearing it since childhood, though I personally never believed it. I mean, jinns exist, but they can't hurt humans in normal circumstances. Now, one day, I went to see a performance in a neighboring village with my friend Aman. By the time the performance ended, it was almost midnight, so we started coming back home, and on the way back, we had to cross an old graveyard. It was one of the biggest paranormal hotspots in our village, apparently. We were just talking about the performance, though, the whole time until we reached said graveyard. Both of us became silent then, and we crossed this road many times, but never this late at night. Our bodies suddenly felt heavy as we crossed it. Every noise sort of felt paranormal, but that's just being on edge, right, out in the dark. Each step felt slower than the last, but suddenly we heard a really weird faint noise. As we walked down the road, the sound became louder and clearer, and we were certain that it was the cry of a child. I looked at Aman upon hearing that, and Aman was just as scared as I was, I think. As we slowly went closer to the sound, we did see a child about 1 or 2 years old crying beside the road. We didn't approach the child, we didn't even directly look at it, but as we walked by it, my eyes started tearing up a bit, and every inch of me was just telling me to run. I barely managed to keep my sanity at that moment, but I would have probably passed out if I was alone, I would guess. As we were walking past it, taking a wide berth mind you, the crying became louder and louder, to the point like I felt my eardrum would burst. Once we were about 20 meters away from it, the crying just suddenly stopped. I could no longer control my body, and I ended up looking back, and when I did, I saw nothing. It was gone. There wasn't any sign of any kid or anyone else around us. I took a deep breath. My heart felt lighter. Aman looked at me, and he also looked relieved. But before we could say a single sentence, we heard what I can only describe as like a demonic scream. It came from somewhere in the darkness of the graveyard, but that was definitely the last straw for us. We ran as fast as we could, and I could feel my consciousness sort of slipping away as well. What I mean is that I felt sort of woozy and like I was about to go out. But we didn't stop running though until we reached our village. There were a few people sitting beside a campfire playing some cards, and the moment that we saw them, I became, well, unconscious, I think. I just blacked out. I woke up in my grandparents' home. Aman had already woken up and he had told them everything. I confirmed his claims, and apparently what we saw was the ghoul. Some believed us and some didn't. Some are skeptical, as I was and still am to some degree. But I got an earful from my grandmother, and, well, it's been about 3 years since that incident. We still talk about it every now and then when I go back to the village during vacations. I still wonder what would have happened if I had been alone at that time. I mean, maybe I wouldn't be here telling you guys this incident. One thing is for sure though, I'm never ever using that road at night, ever again. A few years back, me and my friend were riding our motorcycles across country. If you've never done that and you get the opportunity, then you should take it. Anyway, we're both amateur storm chasers too, and love finding a safe dry spot to view thunderstorms from a safe distance from. On a motorcycle, it is a lot more dangerous and exciting, as you can probably imagine, but we were in Nebraska and I noticed on the radar that infamous hook where a potential tornado is. No sooner than I told my friend, the sirens in town started going off. The system was still about 15 minutes away, and so we decided to get behind the storm by going south into Kansas. The highway going south was maybe about a mile up the road, so we headed that way, and we were only about 20 miles from the border, but this storm system stretched all the way down to Oklahoma, so we knew that we'd be in for the rain eventually. We did get far enough away where we could stop and watch the lightning and the storm hit where we had been in Nebraska. And now, riding in the rain doesn't bother me too much. It's when there's severe weather that does. It was already getting dark and we started looking for shelter, a barn, gas station, or just something to get out of the pea-sized hail that was starting to fall. But we finally got up into this little town and saw what was, for all intents and purposes, an abandoned boarded-up building on the main drag. We found an awning to get under, and some scrap plywood that we used to lay over the bikes, and an old tire to put over the wood to keep it down. The wind, though, started blowing like mad, and started hailing again, some golf ball-sized hail this time. It was pretty intense, and the wind blowing the rain sideways, and the lightning was striking the ground all around us. The flimsy, what was left of an awning, wasn't keeping dry, but it was keeping the hail off of us, which we were grateful for. My friend was panicking though, saying that there was a radar indication that a tornado in the area was about to hit us, and if he had to break into the building to get out of the storm, he was going to. I was like, bro, we can't do that. I'm not trying to catch a criminal charge or anything. So we both sat there hunkered down, when we heard what sounded like a deep growl. I tried to play it off, but then we heard and the best way that I can describe it is as a raspy voice say, "Come inside." He said, "Did you hear that?" And I said, "I sure as heck did." My heart was racing, but then we hear the same sounding voice, but this time it sounded like it was laughing. My friend was like, "Heck no, to heck with this." By this time the hail had stopped anyway, and it was still raining sideways, but we noped the heck out of there because I can assure you that there was nobody there, and where that voice came from, I still have no idea. The power was still out, and it was around 9:30 at night. We came up on a gas station, and it looked like the entire town was up under the gas station taking shelter. We managed to squeeze in and sheltered the rest of the storm out there. So we managed to squeeze in and we sheltered the rest of the storm out there. The power eventually came back on, and we talked to a few of the locals, and someone told us that the place used to be an inn, and the owner's wife ended up going insane and apparently killed her husband and several other men with a shotgun one night back in the 40s. I will say too that voice that we heard, it did sound a little bit female. So I figured that it's time to fully write out my experiences before they grow too fuzzy in my mind. It was a hot summer in Southern California, around 2007. My now ex-husband, our kids, and I lived a little over an hour from my in-laws' house, and for some reason that night we stayed at their home. It was my son, my husband, and I sleeping in a small room together. His kids were at their mum's nearby, and the house was a really old home in a historic district. It was a cute 3-bedroom home with no central heating or air, but my ex had told me about different hauntings in the house, like a little girl and some other things too. While I believe in the paranormal because of my own experiences, I still believe a good majority of things are people's imaginations, dreams, or mistaken ideas about why things happen. So I wasn't scared at all to sleep in the house. Anyway, I woke up in the middle of the night because I was outrageously hot. I went into the kitchen, turned on the lights, and got a drink of water in hopes of cooling down a bit. I normally sleep like a rock and can usually get right back to sleep when I've woken up, but no such luck that night. I drank some water in the kitchen and realized that I wasn't going to be able to go back to sleep that night, so I thought that I would just watch some TV until I got sleepy enough to try again. I wasn't worried about waking anyone up because the television was on the opposite end of the house anyway from the bedrooms. The kitchen, the front room, and the living room were in a sort of T formation in this house, the T being the walls that separated the rooms. The bottom left section of the T was where the kitchen was at, the bottom right of the T was the front room, and the top of the T was the living room. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I began to walk out of the kitchen and into the living room towards the television. As I walked out of the kitchen, the wall connecting all 3 rooms was about 2 feet from my right side, when I hear a slam as if something had been thrown or hit my side of the wall. Not like someone hit the wall, but more like a small toy was thrown hard at the wall or something. It wasn't a large house by any means. I mean, there were no animals or children, or other than my son for that night. There was a doorway behind me that was really old, and it was definitely closed. It was kind of broken and was easily heard when you opened it though, because it didn't open easily. What I mean is that, either way, if something was thrown, it couldn't have come from the doorway because of the angle. I mean, it would have had to have gone right through me. Which means that the only direction that it could have come from was about 45 degrees directly in front of me from the direction of the television, which there are no doors or windows in that direction, and also nowhere for anyone to hide or anything. My point is that I don't know what the heck that was, or how it could have made it past me without me seeing it. In any case, immediately after hearing whatever it was that hit the wall, I felt a rush past me, like a wind, but more like as if you could strongly feel the wind of somebody running past you. It came from the direction of whatever hit the wall towards the direction of the fireplace. The fireplace was about 4 feet to my left, and as it rushed past me, I immediately hear something hit the fireplace. I looked, but I didn't see anything. The whole thing took about 2 seconds, if that, but there was just no explanation for any of it. My heart jumped into my throat and I wanted to run. I don't like to acknowledge the paranormal because I believe it either gives them power or they know that they can now communicate with you, so they'll do more. So I tried to pretend that I wasn't scared out of my wits. I turned the light switch off calmly and slowly walked back to the bedroom. You know, sort of as if I changed my mind and no longer wanted to watch TV or anything. No big deal, right? Really inside though, I wanted to scream and run, but I wasn't going to give anything that satisfaction. I laid down next to my husband, tried to get as close to him as possible and cover myself up, especially my toes. Remember, it's like 85 degrees in the house, so covering myself up is pretty ridiculous because it is really hot. But I no longer cared about the heat. I was genuinely terrified of whatever just ran past me. So I laid there unable to sleep for at least 2 hours, my heart racing, terrified. And when I told him in the morning what happened, he just laughed and said, "I told you." Needless to say, we didn't sleep there again after that. So years ago, early 1990s, my wife and I rented a home in Kansas City through a lawyer who represented an elderly lady who had returned to where she grew up in Iowa following her husband's passing. One evening while I was home alone, I was putting away some towels in a linen closet in the upstairs hallway directly across from the bathroom. While I was in the closet, I had this strange feeling I was being watched from behind. I turned around and thought I saw an elderly gentleman. It totally freaked me out, but the whole thing was so strange I didn't say anything to my wife for fear of her laughing at me or potentially even scaring her. Anyway, a few months later, I'm downstairs watching a football game on a Sunday afternoon, and she's upstairs putting away towels in the linen closet when she screams and comes running downstairs. I ask her what happened, and she tells me that while she was putting away towels in the linen closet, she felt like she was being watched, and so she turned around and thought that she saw an old man standing there. She was shaking, mind you, while she was saying this. As I was comforting her, I told her the story of my extremely similar experience that I had been too creeped out to share with her for the reasons mentioned earlier. The next time I dropped off a rent check at the lawyer's office, I asked him if by chance he might share with me how the owner's husband had passed away. He told me that the gentleman had suffered a massive heart attack apparently at home and had died by the time that the paramedics arrived. He then asked me why I had inquired about the issue, and I told him that he wouldn't believe the story if I told him, but that I had a strangely odd sort of premonition that a man had died in the home and left it at that. Well, fast forward a few months and we returned home one evening to find out that we had arrived to a burglary in progress. 4 guys came running out of the house, arms full, jumped into a van on the side street, a house was on a corner, and drove away. The insurance claim ended up being about $16,000, a fair amount considering it was the 90s. And after the final settlement check arrived, my insurance company cancelled our insurance, and my agent told me that the only thing that she could tell me was to move. She would say nothing more than that, and 4 months later, we had gone to bed very early and all the lights were off in the house, and we were awoken by another attempted break-in through the same entrance used for the first robbery. It stopped when we started turning the lights on, but we made some demands on the lawyer for the door and the lock improvements, as well as extra outdoor lighting and a security system as well. The estimates we received were about $2,400, and we offered to split the cost. We spoke to the owner and they declined to split the cost, but told us that we were free to do any of the work ourselves if we pleased, which we declined in the end. We terminated the lease and we ended up moving out. The home re-rented very quickly. It was a cute house, a cute neighborhood, just too close to a less desirable area, I suppose. So we were pretty fortunate that we only lost our security deposit in the end. As it turns out though, 2 young female lawyers had rented the house after us. About 9 months later, I received a phone call one evening from a woman asking if I had lived at the address. I told her that I had, and I asked her how she had gotten my name and my number. Turns out some mail with my name had arrived, despite the forwarding order, and I had the only name match in the area in the phone book. She begins to explain her story, which is that she and her partner had been robbed 3 times in the past 9 months, and in their subsequent arguments with the lawyer representing the landlord, he had let it slip that they must have been talking with the prior tenants when they presented a very similar set of demands for improvements to the home, and that's when she tracked me down. During our conversation, she mentioned, though, that they were constantly creeped out after moving in between the burglaries and the odd feeling that they were being watched all the time. Watched? Really? By who? I asked. And they just said to me, an old creepy guy. So I'm a skeptic of most things, except for ghosts and shared dreams and limited telepathy, the latter of which I actually believe is electrical signals and emotional closeness. But I have had a few very minor, uneventful experiences with ghosts. The first happened when I was about 8. I was alone in my father's house and he had gone out shopping. But both cats were outside and I was sitting in the computer room with my back to the door. Now, when I was a kid, I had this little sort of spongy miniature basketball that was the size of a baseball. I specifically remember that I'd left it by the cat tree in the lounge room, which was separated from the computer room by the dining room, and then the kitchen. However, after however long of silently sitting at the computer, I suddenly heard the ball thumping along the wooden floor like it was bouncing, and then it rolled and stopped against my foot. For some reason, I wasn't overly freaked out, but I was just completely perplexed as to how it could have even gotten there. The second event, though, was when I was about 13. I was staying at my grandmother's house while my mum was overseas. She was snoring in the room next to mine, like always, and I was awake reading fanfic on my flip phone. That's when I heard the front door open, and this was a very heavy, thick wooden door, mind you, that would scrape against the stone floor every time that it opened or closed, because the wood was warped and was now slightly too big for the frame. I shot out of bed and stood in the doorway, staring down the hallway towards the front door. I couldn't see it because it was around the next corner, but I stayed there watching to see if anyone walked past. Finally, completely beside myself, I went into my grandmother's room and woke her up, telling her that someone was in the house. She didn't believe me and went back to sleep, and this one is much more easily explained. I get that. It could have been a person, which is infinitely scarier than a ghost, to be honest, but they could have opened the door and been startled how loud it was, and maybe they fled. But what always trips me up is the fact that when I got up the next morning, after a very sleepless night, the door was closed. I only heard it open, and locked with the chain lock. Well, the third one was when I was 16. It was the night my grandmother died, and I was standing outside talking about her with my mum, her daughter, when a single lock of my hair stood up straight in the air like someone was holding it. Again, it could have been the wind, I suppose, but it was odd, that much is for sure. The fourth was when I went on tour for an old hospital in my city before it was demolished. It was at the end of the tour, and we were in the morgue section just wandering around individually. I and 2 others opened a door that led to a long dark corridor when a door at the end of it, around the corner, suddenly slammed shut. I have never felt that afraid, too. My hands were shaking so much that the torchlight was bouncing everywhere. No one was supposed to be in there, but again, I guess it's sort of easily explained. It could have been squatters or maybe urban explorers or even a gimmick by the tour company, and my fear was heightened because I was already so freaked out by the hospital itself. I'm not too sure what it was, but I did feel really creeped out by whatever it was. And the last, and the one that I'm most certain of, happened just a few days ago, now that I'm 26. So I was at work with two of my co-workers. We work in an old mall from the 19th century. It's very pretty as well. The shop was empty and we were chatting when we started to hear heavy footsteps right above us. That's where the kitchen where we have our breaks is, so we're very used to the sound of somebody walking up there, and we thought one of our managers may have slipped past us or something. We called up to her and there was no answer. When I go up to check it out, I realized pretty quickly that the upstairs was completely empty. When I go back down for about 10 minutes afterward, there were these heavy footsteps and then the dragging of furniture right above our heads. One of my co-workers said that it was a ghost the mall was familiar with, apparently. He died in the early 1900s and he's well known by all the shop workers in the mall. Now, of all of them, I would say that the first one and the last one are the most difficult for me to explain. Although with the first one, maybe one of the cats was inside after all. I guess that's possible, but the last one, really, I just have no explanation for whatsoever. So this is a story that was actually given to me by a friend. He explained that he woke up in the middle of the night because he thought that he heard footsteps coming down the hallway, and he's alone in the basement. The barn door to his room is locked from the inside with one of those cheap swinging metal latches, and he hears that latch fling open, and the barn door slammed across the slider and dented the wall. Then he describes this short, skinny human with huge eyes, and said that it looked somewhat similar to Gollum from Lord of the Rings. Weak, short, huge eyes, pale, bruised skin. This thing walks around the corner into his room, and as soon as it passes the drywall that was blocking his view, he said that it made eye contact with him for a second, and the thing lunged at him. While he was on his bed and in his underwear, he describes kicking this thing away, and at first the thing would just keep coming back until eventually he kicked it so far that it was out of view, blocked by the wall from his point of view, and the thing just disappears. But he then says immediately after that, this 8-foot-tall, skinny, all-black humanoid thing crawls out of the ceiling, saying that it began walking in circles on all fours above his bed, until after less than a minute of doing so, crawls down the wall that is past the end of his bed, and then stands up at the end of his bed. He said that when it stood, it was as tall as the ceiling was, standing at the small space between the end of his bed and the wall. It sort of crawled down and it went down the wall-mounted TV behind it. The creature then lunged at him again. He described a similar thing with kicking it off and fighting with it until he kicked it onto a wall and apparently it disappeared. Now, I'm pretty sure I was sleeping when he called me just after this, obviously terrified and confused, telling me all about what had just happened and how he wasn't sure whether it was a dream or not. Yet, weirdly, the door was open, and he said that he called me right after they were there and didn't remember waking up before he called me. That's really strange, right? In any case, now we know it was 100% not a dream to some extent at least because, well, 1, the barn door is 100 pounds on a track and cannot move on its own weight. 2, the latch was on the inside with horizontal pressure. It needs vertical pressure to open. 3, the wall was definitely dented afterwards, and it was quite a dent, let me tell you. 4, he doesn't remember waking up other than when he heard the footsteps in the hallway. And 5, events like this began to happen frequently after this until, after months, his mum experienced clearly hearing people in the house when she was home alone. Is that just coincidental? We're not sure, but we think that it adds to the weight of the validity of his own experience. I'm sorry if this is a bit of a long one, but there have been a few strange happenings in my life in the past 24 hours, and I feel like there's a lot of background info needed for all of it to make any sense. So to begin, both of my parents are dead. I'm 24, female now, but my mum passed when I was 15 and my dad just 9 months later when I was 16. Mum passed in a car accident, and Dad, well, he ended his own life. My dad was a firefighter for most of his life, and both parents struggled with addiction. I'm not sure how relevant that is, but just so you have all of the info, I think it's worth knowing. So, here's where it really starts. I was standing in the corner of my kitchen this morning, huge open floor plan, so my back was to the rest of the apartment. I was making myself some breakfast when I hear what is distinctly a man taking a deep breath or a sigh. It sounded like it was right behind me, so I spun around. Obviously, nothing was there though. It's early morning, my cats were sleeping upstairs and wouldn't be able to make that noise regardless. No electronics were on at all because my roommate and I unplugged them last night due to a lot of thunderstorms in our city. My roommate was asleep and he sleeps with tape over his mouth. Don't ask, he's a mouth breather, so he couldn't have made the noise either. Not to mention that his room is on the other side of the kitchen, not behind me. I genuinely have no idea what could have made that noise, other than some kind of an entity, really. After that, I finish getting ready and I go to work. I tell my co-workers what happened, and I started to kind of piece together some other things that have been going on lately and connect them a bit. For example, last night at work I got 2 phone calls within 5 minutes of each other, and both of them just said goodbye in a man's voice and hung up. My roommate also left a candle burning in the shared bathroom overnight, and my dad, the firefighter, spent my whole life drilling fire safety into my head. But yesterday, I was going through a bunch of my things and spring cleaning essentially, and ended up finding a few of my dad's things that I've never seen before. Even though I've gone through these things dozens of times in the almost 8 years that he's been gone now. But I found a very cryptic note with things written on it like despair, pain, loneliness, darkness, etc. And at the bottom, my name was written and circled. I also found a cassette recorder with my dad's voice on it. I've been getting splitting headaches for the last 2 days too, when I normally don't get them at all. The noise itself sounded like it came from the corner directly behind me, and the only things there are a wax warmer and one of my dad's old bottles from his house, which has its own very creepy backstory. But lastly, to get to my apartment, you have to walk up a stairwell that has motion sensor lights. For the past couple of days, the light has been flickering just non-stop. So, all of that by itself, while still very alarming, could be kind of ignored. But then I get home from work today, open the door to the stairwell. The light is still flickering until I'm standing directly below it, because as soon as I get underneath it, it stops flickering and is working normally. I stood there for almost a full minute and took a video of it to show my roommate, and the second that I turned around to keep going up the stairs, it started to flicker again. I really don't know what to make of any of this or where to go from here, so any advice or thoughts as to all of this genuinely would be greatly appreciated. The house that I currently live in, I've lived in perfectly fine for 6 years now, but I've seen, felt, and heard things in this house. So about 5 years ago, my now ex-husband, his name is Joe, was leaving for work early one morning and he shut the door. After he shut the door, I heard his name being called in the laundry room, which was where he went out, and also right beside the master bedroom. The really creepy part about it, though, is that it was my voice, and I immediately got chills. After that, our oldest son, who was just crawling at the time, had this sort of VTech phone that he would play with. Somehow it ended up in the corner of our living room, and we had a recliner that sat in front of that corner. I didn't know the phone was back there until it started going 666 over and over again. Please keep in mind though that this toy was off at the time, so I picked it up and I threw it outside in the trash. Later, Joe got home and I told him about it, and he laughed and told me that I was probably just hearing things. Fast forward a couple of hours, I was in the shower and he comes in telling me that he needs to talk to me. So I ask about what, and he said that he didn't want to talk inside, he wanted to talk outside. I get out of the shower and put some clothes on and step outside with him, and he tells me that he was taking the trash out, and when he lifted the lid to the trash can outside, the toy, it went off saying 666, and when he looked at it, he confirmed that it was definitely off. I've also felt like I'm being watched. I've heard things moving. I've heard my kids when they aren't even there. Another strong occurrence was after Joe and I split. He came over to see our kids, and I still had the same recliner that the phone was behind, but I got another recliner and had it on the other corner, both facing the TV. He sits in the left one if you're facing the TV, and I sit in the right, and shortly after he sits down, there were 3 knocks on the front door. So he looks at me, and I get a really bad feeling. He goes to open the door, and I told him not to. He does anyway, and there's no one there. So he sits back down, and a few minutes later, there are 3 knocks on the wall behind him. He looks at me wide-eyed, and I just stare at him in a I told you type of way. So 30 or so minutes go by, and we ended up switching recliners, just because we were both up, and now he sits in the right recliner. In the living room, I also had my kid's toy box, and one of the toys that always sat on the floor is like the big square things that you see at doctor's offices with the colourful wire and the beads on it. Well, it literally picked itself up about a foot off the ground and slammed itself on the floor. And at that, his face goes white and he looks at me, and I said, "They don't like you." He left shortly after that. Now, my ex-husband also told me that he left the house one night because he had seen something, like a dark figure, and things got really bad, like it would let us leave and some paranormal activity type stuff would happen, but I really don't remember that too much. I have been having the feeling, though, that something bad is going to happen, and sometimes I just don't feel safe there. But I don't know if anyone has experienced this, and if anyone thinks it could be malicious or just a ghost that's harmless, I would really like to know what I should do next, because I'm sort of in 2 minds, I guess. So, I have very bad insomnia, which leads me to staying awake most nights. And this happened a couple of weeks ago. So we recently changed the flooring in the house from regular carpet to wooden flooring. As a result, from our walls being thin and my new door not fitting properly, I can pretty much hear everything going on in the house crystal clear at the moment. I was laying down trying to sleep, and it must have been around 2:30 or 3 in the morning. My dad had already left for work, and my sister was asleep at this point, so was my dad's wife and my little brother. The thing is, though, is that my little sister's door makes a sort of loud creak when it opens, and I can always hear any door in the house opening since it's a small house and my room is almost in the middle. Well, as I'm laying there with the house dead silent, suddenly there's this sort of, I don't know, like shuffling sound coming from the living room, which is just outside of my room. It's just going in circles around the living room, too. It's not footsteps, it's some sort of shuffling or weird noise. The closest sounds that I can describe it is when my little brother, when he gets upset and instead of walking like normal, he sort of shuffles his feet by not taking footsteps and instead sliding his feet across the wooden floor. The other sound that is sort of similar to what I heard is that when I wear my jeans without shoes, the length of them is too long for me, but that's how I like them, and that, however, makes it so that even when I take a step in the jeans, they don't go off the floor and they sort of drag and create a shuffling noise. That is pretty much what this sounded like. So, I keep hearing a sort of shuffling noise, and it's not consistent. It kind of shuffles for a bit, then stops, then shuffles again. and it does this for some time, just doing circles in the living room. The kitchen is tile, so there would be no shuffling in there, but I thought when I first heard it, great, rats are in the house. But no, it doesn't seem to go to the tiles, it just kept shuffling around in circles in the living room. It gets worse too, because then I start to hear it shuffling closer to the hallway where my door is at. Now, my little brother will sometimes run down the hallway with his fingers and nails on the wall, so I know what it sounds like when someone is running, or a hand or nails or whatever against the wall. And since my room wall makes up part of the hallway wall, it resonates loudly in my room. Whatever it is though, it starts slowly running fingers or something across the wall, slowly moving it to my door. It's moving its body, or what sounds like a hand, across the hallway's wall slowly until it reaches my door. Then it goes quiet for what feels like a couple of minutes. I think to myself, whatever. It has just stopped and it's gone away anyway, so I should get some sleep. But that was when I hear something scratching at my door. It's not fast or frantic scratching. It's slow, purposeful scratching, just slow scratching from the top of the door to the bottom and repeating itself. After a while of that happening, I then hear it shuffling back to the living room. It then quickly turned into a cycle. It would just shuffle around in the living room, then after a while it would scratch the wall to my room and scratch at my door, then back to the living room again. This cycle kept repeating until sometime into the morning, when I started seeing the first sign of light, and basically as soon as the first sign of light came, I mustered up the courage to leave my room and check. But when I did, there was nothing there. All the doors were locked, and like I said, my room is in the dead middle of the house. The walls are thin and my door doesn't fit properly, so I can hear any of the doors open. It's something that I've grown used to. I would have been able to hear if anyone opened one of those doors, but that never happened. So I know for a fact that it wasn't one of them. My hunch is that it was probably just a big rat, but I don't know any rat on the west coast that would just shuffle around the living room like that, scratch the wall slowly, stop at my door, scratch at it for a bit, then repeat the cycle over and over again. Plus, rats can't reach that high. Whatever it was, it freaked me out real bad, and I'm not the type to get scared easily by any means. Whatever it was, it genuinely shook me to my core. Before I start, I just want to say that I haven't really told many people this, mostly because it was a very scary experience for me and I really don't like to relive it. Anyway, this happened in Kelowna, Canada in the 80s. I was about 14 and was babysitting at a neighbor's house while the parents were gone. They had a really nice house too, like most in the neighborhood, and it was right on the corner where two streets connected. My house was right outside of a bus stop, across from theirs. This happened pretty late at night in the winter, so it was dark out, maybe 11 or 12 at night. I was sitting on the couch when I thought that I saw something at the back door. It was one of those glass doors that led to the porch, and it was weird though because I really couldn't see too much. But you know when the lights are on and it's dark out, so you can't really see anything but black and your reflection? Well, that's sort of what I saw, but I could have sworn that it looked like something was there. So I got up and I walked close to the window. It definitely looked like something was there, but I just still couldn't really see it. I got closer and closer, still couldn't see. I honestly should have just turned on the lights, but instead I put my face right to the glass and cupped my hands by my eyes to look out. And maybe about 1 inch from my face, on the other side of the glass, was a man. He looked tall and pale from what I could see, which wasn't too much, and he was staring at me very creepily. Keep in mind, he would have been watching from the backyard. Naturally too, I jumped back and let out a short scream, but stupid teenage me didn't call the cops. I called my parents instead. My father, he came over to take a look. There were still footprints in the front and the backyard, I don't remember too much after that because it just felt like a very unreal experience, I guess. You never expect this stuff to happen to you. That is, until it does. This incident took place about 4 years ago. I was living with my college friends in a shared apartment, but then I got married and I started searching for a separate room to start our new journey as husband and wife. I rented a house, which was a big double-story cottage. The owner, an old couple, they were living in the ground floor and they gave us a room on the first floor. So me and my wife, we moved into this new house. There was nobody else living in that cottage other than the four of us, old couple, me and my wife. Everything was going great too until once I experienced something unusual happening at night. I just felt like somebody was present in our house for whatever reason. I felt like someone was watching us, observing us. It was a really weird feeling, but nothing else really happened, and so life just went on. One day though, my wife decided to visit her parents for a couple of weeks and she left home. I was alone that night, and after finishing the episode of The Big Bang Theory that I was watching, as usual, I went to go and sleep in my bed. It was now the middle of the night, and I was in a deep sleep, and I started feeling like someone was trying to hold my hand and legs. But in the deep sleep, I couldn't really feel much, I guess. But slowly, the grip of my hands and legs became more firm, and it became so firm that suddenly I woke up. And now I could feel 100% that someone was holding my hands and legs. I could barely breathe. I was also feeling like somebody was trying to stop my breathing. I got scared. My heartbeat increased violently and I started sweating. I suddenly remembered that I should speak the religious chants that I learned growing up, but not a single word was coming out of my mouth. I became more desperate and gathered all of my energy to speak chants, but I couldn't. And then I realized that I should speak religious chants in my mind, and this is where I started feeling relieved as the grip of my hands, legs, and on my throat began to loosen. I now began speaking, and I started chanting religious chants out loudly, and slowly, very slowly, everything became normal again, and eventually I sat up in bed, and I just wondered what the heck had happened. After some time, I went back to sleep, and nothing else happened that night. After my wife came back, we shifted to a new rental house, and since then I haven't experienced anything similar again, which is a bit strange, right? So a friend and I, both 21 and female, went to Applebee's for a few $1 margaritas, then went off to a park where she said that she knew a spot. We go 20 minutes away to this park. We go down this path that takes us around 10 minutes to this bay area. We find a nice log and we sit there and we watch the sunset. As we were relaxing on the log, a family strolls by with their dog to hang out on the other side of the shore or whatever. A few minutes go by and a couple comes through and sets up. They eat a big pineapple with a knife, but the sun sets, it's still light out, but we didn't think about the walk back. And eventually we go to head back and it's dark at this point. Now, the wooden area that we have to walk through is getting really dark. So we start walking and she gets her phone camera out. It's pitch black at this point in this forest. We start talking about how creepy it actually was. And it was around this point that I felt an uneasy feeling, that feeling you get afraid that something is behind you. Well, we're walking along and we go across the bridge up a little hill and all of a sudden we hear loud, fast footsteps on the bridge. I see light from what appeared to be from a phone, and it was moving back and forth as if somebody was sprinting. We panicked, we started running, and I'm thinking, no way, this guy's chasing us. And I know that this is going to sound a bit weird, but his footsteps kind of sounded like he was on a bike maybe or something. I thought, we'll go up this steep hill on our left. There's no way that this guy's following us and no way that he would go up this hill on his bike. Turns out, there was no bike. We stopped running as we didn't hear anything. She flashes her light behind us and there's a silhouette of a man now jogging toward us.
His body posture seemed to be like he got tired from running, so we kept running and stopping to see if he was still chasing us, and then again we hear footsteps running toward us. We keep looking back while running to make sure that he's not right on us. At this point, my friend screamed "hey" in a sort of panicked voice, and he screamed back "hey" as well, and then after that said, "What, are you scared?" We keep running. She's on the phone with the police. We finally hit a paved road, nowhere near her car, when I took us up the hill that was on the wrong path we originally took. We knock on a house, lights are on but nobody answers, so we quickly start down the road to their neighbor. I look back and see a silhouette of a man walking behind that first person's house. He eventually got up to the fence and then creeped back into the darkness. That second neighbor, they helped us. His wife got us some water, and the police, they came to take us to her car. And that was the most traumatic experience I think I've ever had. The intentions of the man felt sinister, no doubt, and the way he was yelling at us felt so uncanny. I hate this feeling that I have, and I have so many questions that I know won't be answered. But I just cannot get this one question out of my head. What if he did actually catch up to us? What would have happened? So my dad had 3 consecutive heart attacks in the emergency room in the hospital. The date, June of 2021. The doctors do not expect him to come home, yet he defies them, and 3 weeks later, he is home and under the care of palliative nursing staff, along with my mum and myself. During the next 5 months before he left us, I would walk into the room and he would be fully engrossed in a conversation with the invisibles, as we called them. Like one time he said that the room was full of Mexican people with food, but he wasn't sure that he liked Mexican food. I told him to tell them to go away, and one time he introduced me to the 2 invisibles that he said were fighter pilots. Dad said that his dad had been to see him. My uncle that my dad said traveled thousands of miles to see Dad. And despite all of this last one was definitely the clincher. So 2 days before Dad had passed, Dad was in his chair and I was sitting on his bed. "Who are all these people?" he asked me. "I don't know, Dad. They're invisible, so why don't you ask one?" My dad turns away from me and says, "Excuse me, young man. Sorry to bother you, but what is your name?" There's a brief pause, and my dad turns to me and says, "He says that his name is Andrew." "That's nice," I respond. "What does Andrew do?" he asked me. "I don't know, Dad. I can't see him. Why don't you ask him?" He turns away from me and then says, "Excuse me, Andrew, what do you do?" There's a pause, and Dad, with his hand to his ear, leans forward and says, "I'm sorry, I didn't catch that." He then turned to me and said, He's gone." That was on a Tuesday, and 2 days later, Dad had passed. But this is where the story gets a bit freaky. So, my brother and his second wife show up on Saturday so that we can go to the funeral home and make final arrangements. I leave to put on my makeup and come back into the room 10 minutes later to Mum, my brother, and his second wife sobbing. "What did you say?" I asked my brother. All choked up, he said that he just got off the phone with his first wife, and the youngest son, Andrew, he had been hit at a crosswalk and died 7 days prior to Dad's death. Honestly, I couldn't even tell my brother until later when she had him created and buried before I told him. I personally believe that Andrew didn't want to tell his grandpa that he was dead, and that's why Dad didn't hear him. I think Andrew realized that we hadn't been told of his death and he wasn't going to tell his grandpa. That is, unless Dad didn't want to tell us. His first wife wouldn't let the kids, 5 kids they had together, see my parents, so it's no wonder Dad didn't recognize him too. So yes, I do believe in the afterlife. I just need to finish what I need to do here before I get my turn, I guess. I hope my mum and dad have a really excellent place to live when I get there too. Anyway, thanks for listening. It's a very hard story to share, and it's good to finally get it off my chest a bit. This happened a couple of weeks ago. So I was heading home from my friend's house one night, around 11:30 p.m. My friend lives about 25 minutes from me, and the fastest way to get home is if I take back roads from there. I live in a small rural town. Anyways, I'm driving home with another car about maybe 4 car lengths in front of me. I'm about 5 minutes from my house when I see the car's taillights suddenly break. Then the car speeds off and turns off of a road to where I couldn't see it anymore. I didn't think too much of it. I mean, maybe a raccoon ran out in front of them and they didn't want to hit it. As I get to the part of the road where that car slammed on their brakes, a man, a huge man, probably 6+ feet tall in a black hoodie, jumps in front of my car, flailing his arms and yelling at me. I swerve to the right to not hit him, and I look in my rear view and he's gone. This road does have houses, but where this man was, there were none. No streetlights, no broken down car, nothing. I raced home and called my husband, who was about 2.5 hours away at an event and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I told him what happened and how he just disappeared, and I was terrified to get out of my car to walk out into a house. He stayed on the phone with me until I got inside and immediately headed home too. There's been a lot of weird break-ins around my area lately too, and people trying to steal cars as well. I can't even imagine what would have happened if I stopped my car. Not that I ever would. I mean, I've seen too many true crime documentaries to do that. I avoid taking that way home now, and if I do, honestly, that's pretty much all I think about. The last house that I lived in with my parents was haunted, and I mean severely haunted. When we first moved in and I was left to sit with the stuff while my parents made trips, even though it was empty, I had never been more afraid. I knew that there were things there. I could feel it, and I was terrified. Not long after we moved in, it all started kicking off too. Stuff would move on its own, and I don't mean just things that weren't stable. I had seen it, and my mum had seen it, but my dad still said that he didn't believe in it. Until one night, when we were all watching TV, we looked into the hall all at the same time, and the car keys lifted off the cabinet and fell on the floor like someone had picked them up and dropped them. My dad hadn't seen this happen before, and his response was nervously, "Right, that's it, we're going to bed." Then, there was the thing in the bathroom mirror. So I was cleaning my teeth before bed, and I looked into the mirror, and there was this thing that looked like a little kid with long hair, but its eyes were pure black. Scared the life out of me. But what was even weirder was that when I looked into my wardrobe and there was a crumpled red dress with blue butterflies on it, exactly like what that thing was wearing. It wasn't mine, mind you, and it looked like it would be the right size for maybe a 5-year-old. Once I saw an apparition in the doorway to my parents' bedroom that looked like a woman with long hair holding a knife. I screamed and tried to run, but ended up tripping and falling down the stairs. I told my dad I got spooked by a spider, but then my mum asked when he wasn't around, and when I told her, she wasn't surprised because she sometimes felt that there was someone in the bedroom with her when she was by herself. My dollhouse, it used to open by itself when it was latched. The latch worked fine and was sometimes so stiff that I had to pull on it to get it off, but it would just open when I wasn't even there, near it. My mum didn't believe me until she saw it, and she was startled by it. Something used to play with the bathroom tap too, and it wasn't the tap being dodgy or whatever. It was old and stiff, and a lot of the time took 2 people to just turn it on. The most memorable time, though, was when I was about to head out the door to high school when nobody else was up and the tap turned on. I shouted up the stairs, "Please, now's not the time. I'll get in trouble for leaving the tap on." And amazingly, it actually turned off. Another time when I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed, I was about to leave and suddenly I got this, I don't know, like a strange overwhelming urge to sit down, and as soon as I did, I put my hand out and felt drips of water falling on my hand. I told my mum about it, and She said that it was something related to spirits, but I can't remember exactly what. A lot of the time, both me and my mum would avoid going upstairs, though, because we'd stand at the bottom of the stairs and we'd just get this awful, uneasy feeling that something didn't want us up there. And so, we would just wait. I'll end this by saying that I don't experience hallucinations, I don't have any form of psychosis or schizophrenia, and nothing like this has happened since moving out of that place. And quite honestly, I'm just happy that that place is somebody else's problem now. So this happened to my friend, not me, in 2007. To this day, she describes what she saw in the exact same as she had right after it happened, and can still clearly picture it as well. So, she was walking home from her friend's house at night. This is in a town in southern Oregon, in case that's important, but she doesn't remember the exact time, but says that it was definitely after midnight, and it was dark, so nobody else was out. She says that she was completely sober, and not sleep-deprived or anything. She was on her way home, and just about 2 blocks from her house, she was walking on the sidewalk along the main street and was crossing between 5th and 6th Street. Her house is on 7th. Across the street is a Safeway and a cemetery, and right then she noticed something about 50 feet ahead of her, crossing the street from the cemetery side to the side that she was on. And this is how she describes it. There were 2 creature things walking on their hind legs side by side. One was slightly shorter than the other, but they were both really tall, at least 7 feet. They were hunched over, lanky and extremely thin. She says that her immediate first thought was they looked almost like deer walking on their hind legs, but they didn't have any fur. It was more like a dark grayish skin. They held their arms and wrists kind of like how a T-Rex would, but their arms and hands were very long still, almost as long as their legs. When I asked, she said that she didn't see any tails. I asked her if they had hooves, and she says that she thinks so, but can't remember that part for certain. Everything was quiet, and she didn't hear them making any sounds on the pavement as they walked. I asked her if they had any antlers or deer-like shaped face, me thinking that maybe it actually was just hairless deer walking on their hind legs for some reason. She said no antlers though, and their heads were not shaped like a deer's or any animal, but more like a person's. She describes their faces as looking human, with human features, but something was just slightly off. She had frozen where she was as soon as she saw them. Everything was quiet, and there were no cars driving by or anyone else around, which is pretty normal at night in our small town. But she says that she stood there kind of in shock. She watched as the 2 creatures slowly walked side by side, silently from across the street and over to the side of the street that she was on. She says that they didn't seem to see her at all, or if they did notice her, they didn't act at all like they did. She says that they acted as if they were simply a couple going on a casual night stroll together. She doesn't remember feeling any negative energy or vibes. She just felt fear because she was, well, pretty scared by what she saw. As soon as they finished crossing the street, they continued straight down 6th Street, and she couldn't see them after they passed the first house and kept walking down. At that point, she said that she snapped out of the shock and started running the 1 more block towards 6th Street to see where they were going. Once there, she turned down 6th Street to follow them, but at this point, they were completely gone. She doesn't know where they could have possibly gone that fast though, considering that they were just walking. They're not walking fast, but like I said, almost as if the 2 of them were just out on a casual night stroll. As soon as she realized that they had somehow disappeared out of nowhere though, she started running as fast as she could the 1 more block to her house on 7th Street. She told her mum and sister the next morning, and she says that these creatures were like nothing she had ever seen or heard of before. The closest thing that she could compare it to is a werewolf, like the one that Professor Lupin changes into the Harry Potter movies, hairless, super lanky and hunched over strangely. Except these ones had more human-like heads or faces than a wolf. She's only ever told her family and a few friends, me being one of them, about this. And also, she has no history of any mental illness or anything. but whenever I ask her about it, she describes it the exact same way and is still pretty shook up when she thinks about it. Also, nothing like that has happened to her before or since then. Does anyone know what this could have been, though? I've heard about not deers on Reddit, but I'm not sure that really fits because I think that those are more animal-like shaped and usually on all fours, right? If you guys have any questions, then I'm happy to ask her and get back to you, but any input would be greatly appreciated as both of us, I'll admit, are a bit lost. So I worked for Disney many years ago and was sent to take still photos of the Queen Mary for locations reference purposes. As part of the assignment, I was privately taken around the ship to various off-limits to the public areas by a very friendly and jovial security guard. We had been at it for about an hour when he took me up to the bridge. It was a cool autumn late afternoon and there was a slight breeze in the dusky air. The control room, or wheelhouse, was locked, so I wasn't able to go inside. Instead, I was taking photos of the interior through an exterior window. The security guard, who was with me, he got called to another part of the ship and had to leave me alone for a moment. He promised to return in about 15 minutes. Shooting through the window, I had my back to the captain's walk, which is where we came up from. I was looking through the camera viewfinder, which meant that I completely lost visual contact with what was immediately around me. Taking photos, I heard footsteps over my shoulder to my right, and I figured the security guard had returned. Then I felt a hand on my right shoulder, and obviously that completely startled me. I dropped the camera into my left hand and swung my right hand backward to brush away the security guard's hand, only to find that there was nobody there. Just flags waving in the breeze and the quiet of the early evening. I shrugged the footsteps and the feeling of the hand on my shoulder off as a very convincing figment of my imagination. When the security guard eventually returned, I told him about what had happened, and his demeanor changed from jovial to quite serious. "Let's get out of here," he said, nervously. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me that there were ghost stories about the captain's walk, that people have seen the former captain of the Queen Mary on the walk in the early evenings patrolling his bridge. And he also told me that some people reported feeling the presence of someone when nobody was there. Hearing that was enough for me too. I was more than happy to oblige our getting out of there and finishing the rest of the tour as quickly as possible. One of my earliest memories as a child is from one time my grandparents left me home alone effectively when I was 4 or 5. I was playing in my room with some toys when suddenly I noticed a man outside my window. For context, my childhood home had an enclosed patio which I could see from my window. He couldn't have just gotten in other words. At this point, I'm terrified and just stay in my room, but he soon simply enters it. I don't remember his appearance too well, but I remember I called him the chicken head man because he had a mohawk haircut. He doesn't say nor do anything. He just stands there catatonic, turns around and then leaves. I, being a stupid kid, decided to follow him. He truly wasn't doing anything. He was just sort of pacing through our hallway. He would walk to my grandfather's office, my mum's room, and my room, and then just repeat it. Eventually, I got bored of following him, and I just went to my room, and he didn't come back. I don't really remember how scared I was, but according to my parents, I was freaked out. But anyways, after this happens and my mum comes back home, I tell her about the chicken head man, and she is terrified. Turns out, she had been experiencing frequent night terrors where she would wake up and the same man would be sitting across the room staring at her. She decided that my encounter with him was enough proof that he was real, and she hired an exorcist to come and cleanse the house. And weirdly enough, I never had another encounter with the supernatural that I know of after that. This happened a long time ago, but the memory of it is still very much burned into me. I was young enough to still be sitting in those booster seats that you put your child in with the tray attachment for food. I was playing with a little toy car in the back seat of an old 1988 Honda Civic in my little car seat. We were on the road when suddenly and slowly a shadowy figure crossed over in front of me. The best way that I can describe it is that it was shaped like one of those Pac-Man ghosts, but black and with a pair of human-like eyes, no other facial features. It was small enough to fit on my kiddie tray thing that I was using as a race car track for my toy as it passed in front of me. Even then, I remember being freaked out since nothing in the car even remotely looked like that, nor could anything have reflected a shadow to look like what I had just seen. Of course, I immediately told my parents, who just simply brushed it off and didn't believe me. Even now, as I think of it more and more, I really still cannot explain it. The second time I saw it, it was a little while later. I can't remember how much later, but I know that I had outgrown the booster seat by this point, but was still sitting in the back of the car. I was climbing into the back seat of that car when I saw it again. Only this time it was on the seats and much bigger than before, tall enough to cover the whole middle seat in its shadow. It was positioned almost as if it was looking out from behind the shadow being cast by the driver's seat, and only one eye showed this time. I completely lost it though, and quickly ran from that car to my parents' confusion. Now, I knew that this couldn't possibly be a shadow being cast from something already in the car, and when I finally worked up the courage to look again with my parents, it was gone. To this day, I haven't had any paranormal encounters nearly as weird as that one. I'm not one to believe in ghosts or spirits, but even I can't begin to explain what it was that I saw then. That was the last time that I saw that ghost or whatever it was, and shortly after that, my father gave away that car to a friend of his. I don't know if ghosts can haunt cars or whatever, but if they can, then that car was for sure haunted. This isn't my first encounter in my life, but it definitely was the most convincing. I was in Okinawa for a few months, but one day some friends and I decided to go see Shuri Castle. It had burned down a while ago, so there wasn't much to see anymore, but we decided to go anyway. While wandering around, we came across these steps that led down to a pond. So we headed down to check it out when I noticed this path over to the left. I decided to follow it because, why not? And I noticed this hole, or maybe like an old entry into a room of some sort. It was barred up so you couldn't walk into it, but while I was looking, I noticed this dark mass. The room itself was already dark, but this mass was noticeably darker. I could also see a very strong energy coming from it, sort of, but after trying to figure out what it was for a few seconds, I called my friend over to see if he noticed it too. He said that he couldn't see anything, but when I tried to point it out, it sort of rushed me. At this point, I get chills throughout my entire body, and I begin feeling extremely sad all of a sudden, like I'm about to cry. My buddy noticed this change in me, and we honestly started laughing about the situation since it was kind of crazy, to be honest. We end up walking away and continuing down the main path towards the pond. I couldn't shake this feeling, though, of whatever I just encountered that it gave me. So on our way back, I decided to take another look, but this time it rushed me instantly, and it was there again. I turned around and went back to the main path, but whatever it was, it stayed with me. I began feeling like my energy was leaving my body, to the point that I had to sit in the middle of the path because I felt like I was about to pass out. I kept telling whatever it was to go away, that it wasn't allowed to follow me, but it wasn't listening, that's for sure. The rest of the day we spent in Naha, I just couldn't shake this thing too. Even when we got back to where we were staying, all night I could feel it watching me while I was trying to sleep. I asked my friend's wife, who was a local, to see if I could get a cleansing anywhere, and thankfully, she was able to help me out. It was just a really freaky situation and experience, and the energy that it gave off was extremely powerful, whatever it was. I've never felt something like that before, and I really hope to never encounter anything like it again. Back in 2018, I was 17 around that time. I was living in foster care. The group home was situated on a busy street, and despite living in the city, we had a backyard, basketball court, picnic table, and at the very back we even had some grass. The whole backyard, it was surrounded by 2-meter tall chain link fences. There were houses to the right and the left of ours. At the very back of the yard, on the other side of the fence, there was a public walking or biking path that stretched at least a dozen kilometers. This path, it would take you through this huge park, along the water, to the beach, etc. It was a very popular area for people to visit too. Now, I was a regular cannabis smoker, although I was always very well put together for a teenager. The group home workers agreed to turn a blind eye on me as long as I didn't make it obvious. So on weekend mornings, I'd go for a walk to the park behind the house. I'd roll up on a park bench and I would smoke. But one day, everything changed. It was a weekend morning as usual at 7 a.m. I made my way to my favorite park bench. I'm sitting there with my joint in my hand. It was quite windy and it kept lighting out. I was facing the water, about 100 meters of field between the waterfront and I, when I noticed a man stomping through the field, heading straight for me. He didn't seem like he was on a leisurely walk at all. I remember thinking to myself, 1, why is he not using the paved path? 2, why does it seem like he's walking straight towards me? 3, what is he holding? 4, is anybody else around? And at all that, panic ensued. He was holding something chunky in one of his hands. I looked around for someone, noticed an elderly woman walking from the direction of the group home. She was about 20 meters away from me, and I sped walk towards the woman. By the time that I got to her, the man, he had made it to the bench that I was sitting on. The woman kept walking towards the bench, and I in the opposite direction. For a moment, I looked back to make sure the man wasn't following me, or worse. I see the man lay his brick down on a pile of rocks behind the bench. The woman stopped walking. I'm guessing that she had processed something peculiar was going on too. Thankfully, the man kept moving straight towards the boulevard and was no longer to be seen in the park. The woman, she then turns around and she looks at me with this sort of shocked stare in her eyes, and I remember feeling reassured by that. We both continued on with our days without saying a single word. But the same day at around 9 p.m., people aren't allowed to smoke within 10 meters of an entry to an establishment, and there was only one light in the backyard, so it was above the entry to the establishment, and this girl in my group home goes out for a smoke in the backyard, no lights on. And like 3 minutes later, she's banging on the door yelling, so I let her in obviously. She's freaking out. We're trying to get answers out of her, but it's hard. Then she explains that there was a man. He stood there on the path, allegedly. She watched and stared, taking pulls of a cigarette. The man then starts walking towards her and starts climbing the fence. That's when I shared my story from that same morning. To be honest, I thought that I was just being paranoid at first. But when I heard that somebody had tried to hop the fence, and the guy was described to look very similar to the person that I saw, I truly believe that it was the same man. The workers on the shift that night, they called the police, and the police started patrolling the path at night. The group home added some garden lights in the back, and honestly, I just hope that this person never lays hands on anyone, because that wild look in his eyes, if he does, I really don't like to think about what might happen. I want to preface this story by saying that while I am pretty much agnostic on a good day and an atheist on a bad day, I am still a fan of horror, and I grew up in a fairly religious environment via a very evangelical Christian high school. So my point of view may be skewed by those influences, I'll admit. However, I do think whatever my fiancé and I witnessed was, at the very least, an extremely dangerous person. So, for context, I started college in the fall of 2018, going to a university in a somewhat rural area. The college itself, it sits on a large plot of land surrounded by farmland and vineyards, with sections that are forested and have sort of little trails running through them, and a creek that runs through the length of the school property even. The college has even had a murder victim dumped in one of the wooded areas on the campus, but that's a story for another day. Freshmen, though, were required to live on campus their first year, and one of the benefits of that was that we had unlimited access to the school cafeteria, aka the CAF. The CAF, it was pretty nice, boasting a salad bar, sandwich station, mini bakery, hot food with different menus daily, and pretty much every fountain drink that you can think of. I would get lunch and dinner there with my only friend at the time, and who is now my fiancé, might I add, and we began to notice this boy who was always at the CAF alone. It wasn't uncommon to see students eating there alone. My school had pretty poor community outreach or school spirit, but something was just, I don't know, really off about this kid. Like, first off, he had a very distinct look. This is important too because we recognized him multiple times over 3 years. His skin, it was extremely pale, and had this sort of waxy flesh look to it that I struggled to describe, almost like he was made of wax, but he also had red curly hair, insert ginger joke here, I know, but a mouth a little too large for his face, but what was the strangest thing about him were his eyes. They were the same color as his hair, that bright red auburn. His iris was almost too big for his eye, and his pupils, they were extremely dilated. His eyes had a sort of bulging look to them too, very similar to Mark Zuckerberg, like they were trying to escape his face almost. It's hard to describe here, but he just had a very, I don't know, unsettling look to him. It just felt like there was something very wrong with him, like there was nothing inside of him almost. But his appearance wasn't what caught our attention at first, to be honest. What caught our attention was the amount of food that this kid would eat. Of course, having unlimited access to food, some kids went really overboard, right? But this kid, he was on another level altogether. He always had 5 or 6 cups of juice, soda, coffee, and 3 or 4 plates piled with food. Mind you, he was not large or overweight, but he would clear every plate and then just sit in his booth alone, staring into space with his headphones in. That was another thing too. He always had this blank, sort of vacant expression, always staring into nothing. Whenever you walked past his booth, you could hear that the music from his headphones was on full blast. We began to notice too that no matter what time we went to the CAF, whether it be for a late night snack, a breakfast, a random afternoon craving, he was just always there, sitting alone in the ruins of his empty plates. And we weren't the only people who noticed this strange behavior too. By second semester, people began approaching him. At first, just some girls jokingly saying something to the effect of, "We strive to be on your level," referencing his eating habits, and he just stared at them blankly. People began to ask if he was okay, if he would like to join them, but he always just stared, sometimes with a sort of knowing smile on his face, but would never reply, leaving the students to depart awkwardly. Once I even witnessed one of the CAF attendants telling him that he needed to stop spending all his time there. My friend that I always ate with became my boyfriend in the end, and we began to theorize what exactly this kid's deal was. We said maybe mental illness, or maybe he was a competitive eater, or he was trying to bulk up or whatever, but his behavior seemed too empty, too neurotic to be explained away by any of these. Our main theory, the one that I subscribe to now, it didn't come till much later. My sophomore year, I opted to live on campus again, and in the middle of my second semester, that was when COVID hit. My school, they allowed us to remain on campus until the school year was up, and due to some personal reasons for not wanting to go home, I remained in my dorm, and my boyfriend joined me and we quarantined together. That time was honestly just so strange because our campus became an incredibly liminal space without all the other students. Some others remained with us, but on any given day you would walk the entire campus and not run into another soul. My boyfriend and I, we started running the wooded trails on campus to get some exercise too. And one day, we stopped on one of the trails to do some burpees. As we did so, the kid from the caf emerged from the trees all of a sudden. Not on any trail, just walked out of the woods and started running toward us. This really caught us off guard because, we rarely saw anyone at this point, and he just made a beeline toward us. Right as he ran up on us, though, he just stopped, just smiled at us knowingly, as if we shared some joke. But it was not a smile. In fact, it was incredibly nasty, sinister even. I don't know if I felt that way because he had scared us, but something was definitely off. We had never spoken to him those times at the caf, but he definitely seemed to recognize us. The other thing that was weird was that he was now jacked, way taller and just larger than he had ever been freshman year. And it wasn't just that he gained muscle, he just seemed like he scaled up a whole lot. Like he hit a massive growth spurt, which I suppose is plausible, but it just seemed really off. Anyway, we were both obviously shaken by the experience, and began to joke that he had been eating so much to store up energy so he could level up or something. And one of us, I forget which, but we suggested that he looked so strange because it was a demon wearing a human skin and was eating so much to build strength for his demonic powers, and that's how he grew so quickly. Like I said, it began as a joke, but the more that we discussed it, the more it just seemed to explain not only his odd appearance, but his odd behavior toward other students, the empty look in his eyes. But here's where things went from just weird to, honestly, downright terrifying. So my boyfriend and I forgot about him eventually, and moved out of my dorm into an apartment a few blocks from school as we were still finishing, and because school was mostly online now, obviously with COVID, and I liked the area. The same creek that ran the length of our school campus ran behind our complex, and as it was still COVID lockdown and we had nothing to do, we would often go on long walks up and down the creek. Now, one evening we went for a walk at dusk, and by the time that we got to the main road our apartment was on, it was completely dark. It was extremely quiet, and as we walked along the road, we saw that we were coming up on a man walking very slow and deliberate. My hackles were up immediately, as our apartment is in a pretty seedy area and there was a lot of homeless and unstable people who sometimes hung out from the creek. And there was just something about his walk. It was so deliberate and predatory almost. As we crossed paths with the man, though, he walked even slower, and in the dim light of the street lamps I realized that I recognized him as that same kid, that same waxy face and bulging eyes. I also realized that in one hand, he held a paper bag with something big and round in it, while in the other, he was holding a crowbar. Yeah, a crowbar. He slowed down even more as he passed us and turned his whole head and smiled at us. This time there was no mistake when I tell you that it was very threatening. It was the most sinister smile that I'd ever seen, in fact, and it had that same knowing in it, like he knew us and we shared some joke. He didn't say anything, just stared at us with his horrible eyes. I don't know if I just read too many creepypastas or if I'm overthinking things, but I knew on an animalistic level that he wanted to hurt us and wanted us to know that he could. After we passed him, we took off running, and when we returned to the apartment, we were both in a full-blown panic. Even my boyfriend, who tends to be pretty level-headed and skeptical, wanted to call the police at this stage. We did, and as soon as we began to explain the situation, we felt pretty foolish about it. They asked if he threatened us, and we said not verbally, but we felt threatened. Despite the absurdity of our call, they said that they would look into it because obviously there's not a lot of non-nefarious reasons to be walking around at night with a crowbar. But we never heard anything, and after that, we never saw him again. Now, to close this, I just think the whole thing is strange. How this kid kept showing up in our lives over 3 years and always seemed to recognize us, always seemed to want to let us know that he knew us. I think as people, we know when there's just something off about a person, right? When there's nothing going on inside. People have said as much about sociopaths that they've had run-ins with. But I want to know what you guys think. Did I encounter the Antichrist leveling up, a demon, or just a really troubled kid who became a dangerous man? Maybe he was just a depressed kid, but I will hold firm that we were, at the very least, threatened by this guy, that he wanted to hurt us, and that we encountered something or someone very evil. But what do you guys think? Also, I did some rudimentary Google searches for police reports in the area for, assault with a crowbar or whatever, and some other things that might have related to that, but in the end, we couldn't find anything.